Please take your seats. The meeting is about to begin. Remember to speak into the microphone, as this meeting is being recorded for public record. Please stand by. We are going on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon and welcome to the March 11th meeting of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee. Mr. Attorney, why don't we do a roll call to establish quorum?
Sure. Commissioner Suarez is present, Vice Mayor Bott,
Here.
and Chairman Fernandez.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, and let's get the virtual participation notice read into the record.
Today's meeting of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee will be conducted in a hybrid format, with members of the committee physically present in the commission chambers and staff and members of the public appearing either in person or virtually via Zoom. To participate virtually, the public may dial 1-888-475-4499 and enter the webinar ID, which is 8505-9923-037#, or log into the Zoom app and enter the webinar ID, which is 8505-9923-037. If you're wishing to speak on an item, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom app or dial *9 if you are participating by phone.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Mr. Director, are there any additions, withdrawals, deferrals to today's printed agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, 2 announcements. Item number 11, which is the item pertaining to the opening of the Bay Walk and the development of the Bay Walk, moving up the Bay Walk on the GeoBond prioritization list, and updates to the Bay Walk presented to the Land Use Committee. That item has been withdrawn by the item sponsor. And item number 15, which is to discuss a possible agreement for development and conveyance to the city of a public parking garage at 1247 to 1255 West Avenue for city garage. This item is being deferred to the April 15th Land Use Committee meeting.
Okay, with that, is there a motion to set the agenda with a withdrawal of item number 11 and the deferral of item number 15? It's been moved by committee member Suarez, seconded by the vice chair.
Yep.
We can show the agenda adopted by acclamation. Mr. Director, let's introduce item number 1.
Okay, item number 1 is discuss and review the final report and recommendations of the 2024 Ad Hoc Historic Preservation Ordinance Advisory Review Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Director. And with item number 1, what we're going to do with item number 1, as part of item number 1, we're going to discuss item 2 through 7. Items 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7 are covered under the incentives section of the presentation that our Chief Preservation Officer is going to present it to us. And item number 4 is going to be covered under the review process. So you know, these items, they're all incorporated into this. And I'm just going to introduce this item quickly before we go into our staff presentation. As we all know, Miami Beach is home to 14 historic districts and 17 individual historic districts. We have 31 historic single-family homes, all of which are critical to our city's heritage and contribute not only to the economic growth of our city, but also to our state. The city's historic preservation ordinance was initially adopted in 1982 and has been in place now for over 4 decades. And throughout its history, it has undergone several amendments. However, the last comprehensive review of the ordinance was completed in 2001, meaning it's been nearly 25 years since the Historic Preservation Code was last updated. On March of last year, I sponsored a resolution establishing the Ad Hoc Historic Preservation Ordinance Review Advisory Committee. I dare any one of us to say that 3 times quickly, to comprehensively review these regulations. It was evident that our Historic Preservation Code needed to be reviewed and updated to better facilitate preservation efforts and ensure the protection of these important landmarks in our city. Establishing the Ad Hoc Historic Preservation Ordinance Review Advisory Committee was a crucial step in addressing the challenges facing many of our city's historic districts. The committee was designed to be non-political in nature and professionally driven. It was led by its chair, Rick Lopez, a professor at the University of Miami and a former chair of our Historic Preservation Board. The committee was also composed of a diverse group of community stakeholders. There were activists, there were bankers, there were developers, and there were residents from neighborhood associations that participated in this review committee. The committee's work focused on identifying ways to simplify and enhance the preservation process and make it easier to protect our historic assets. And they looked into many aspects of preservation, incentives to encourage property owners to preserve historic properties. They focused on improving the review process and administrative review processes. They discussed updating existing regulations. So today we're going to review these recommendations, but as we've reviewed these recommendations, we are making an investment in the future of Miami Beach, ensuring that not only do we remain a vibrant city and a culturally rich city, but that we maintain it a historically significant city for generations to come. I'm going to invite now to the podium our Chief Preservation Officer, Debbie Tackett, who was a liaison to this committee to guide us through the work that they have done for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Before I get started, I had, Mr. Chair, a request from the committee's chairperson, Rick Lopez, who would like to say a few words, if you will. He'll be brief.
Sure. And Mr. Attorney, do we have Chair Lopez on the line?
Yes, and he's already been made a panelist.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Mr. Lopez, I just want to start by recognizing the members of the advisory committee and thank them and you for all of your work over the course of the 5 months from June 2024 to October 2024 that you all were working on this item. So I want to welcome you to offer some remarks.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Commissioner, and good afternoon to all the committee members. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for allowing us to form this committee. And I also wanted to recognize my former committee members, which, as you say, were diverse in terms of where they're coming from professionally. They include Michael Goldberg, who served as the vice chair, Alex Witkoff, Andrew Halloran, Scott Needleman, Daniel Serraldo, and Javier Granda. And I also wanted to thank your city staff, who I've gotten to know for a number of years when I was on the preservation board. But during this process, Debbie Tackett, Jake Sieberling, and Nick Keller just were a huge help. And I think they guided us through what was a very amicable and positive experience. Finding a number of ways to streamline the process, to facilitate folks, whether they're coming from a single family house to larger, more complex projects, to be able to engage the process, find incentives to restore and protect their properties, and hopefully make Miami Beach keep it a great place for a long time to come. Also, just wanted to point out one of our recommendations, and I know you guys are going to go through it in more detail, but to facilitate the additional incentive process that we recommended, we recognize that your staff has a lot on their plate, and we may be adding to their charge with some of these recommendations. And so just want to point out that it should be considered that they may need an extra hand or two. And so anyway, with that, thank you for including us and allowing us to make these recommendations to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez, and as was noted on the recommendations, certainly the additional staff members that may be needed, not only to process planning applications, but to process any new incentives is something certainly that the committee will consider. Debbie, the floor is yours to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the course of it was about a 5-month committee, the committee really focused on 3 main areas of their recommendations. One was the certificate of appropriateness criteria. The second area they focused on was the process, both the Historic Preservation Board and the administrative review process. And lastly, they discussed at length possible existing incentives and possible future incentives. I'm just going to jump right in, and feel free if you have any questions, because it's a lot of information, to interrupt. The first item was with regard to the certificate of appropriateness criteria. With our existing criteria, it is quite extensive. I could not find a comparable municipality with anywhere close to the amount of criteria that we have.
How many criteria?
We have over 50 criteria. If you take everything together, the sea level rise criteria, the demolition criteria, and then all of the design criteria.
How many do most other cities have?
Most other historic cities, and we looked at comparable cities, have the 10 that are found in the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation.
So most cities, historic cities, have 10. We have 50 criteria.
Yes, and they've been added to over the years. So what we did as staff members is we identified some of the criteria that we believed were redundant, that were obsolete, or that simply were informational type, not really even criteria, right? They were informational. I can give you some examples. For example, in the demolition criteria, there is a criteria that talks about, is the demolition for a parking garage? And that parking garages, it states in the criteria, parking garages are not permitted as main use structures on lots along Ocean Drive or Espanola Way. Well, a lot of this information's in the code. These are code requirements and aren't really review criteria for a land use board. Several of the other criteria, again, many of them were redundant. They were repeated throughout. They're also redundant with the Secretary of Interior standards, which we do have, and we presented to the committee. So we have those 10 plus our local criteria. After a long discussion, the committee did recommend consolidating these, which would equal the removal of about 15. I think it's either 15 or 16 criteria. We went through each one individually. And they unanimously agreed that yes, for perception purposes and for ease of not only, our staff analysis, but also board level review, that we should simplify these.
And I would imagine this also has an impact to applicants when we have these redundant requirements in the code.
Correct. The applicants, as part of their submission, do respond to all of our criteria. They for some of the criteria, they usually summarize in their response instead of listing them, but we have other applicants that actually will list them out, which is very difficult to do.
Commissioner Bond. Vice Mayor Bond.
I can only say that for a couple more days or weeks. So just to be clear, these were agreed upon unanimously.
Yes.
Okay. And streamlining is good, 100% in favor of streamlining. It doesn't reduce the protections that we're trying to keep from being eroded.
Correct.
The things that are listed as criteria, for instance, that you say are already in the code, and you mentioned are for the benefit of the people, like on HPB, for instance. Wouldn't that be more of a, as a project comes up for review, that you or somebody else, somebody on staff would say, just as a reminder, this is in the code, because people on HPB and DRB are not going to know the ins and outs of the code. So it wouldn't have to be a criteria, but it would be something that gets pointed out on when each project is being considered.
That is correct.
Okay.
And we also do have another criteria that will remain as part of this recommendation that says, is this application consistent with all applicable zoning and comprehensive plan? The staff report that we present to the board also prepares a zoning analysis as part of that narrative.
If there were a project that hit 9 out of the 10, it would be noted somewhere either by the applicant's lawyer or by staff saying, this hits 9 out of the 10, here's the one it doesn't, and here's why you're still talking about it.
Yes, we actually respond to all of the criteria in our staff reports.
Okay.
So this we'll save a couple trees by not having to list and
Yeah,
respond
all in
to
favor
all
of
of them.
All right.
Okay. We'll move on to the second topic of discussion, and this one is a bit more intensive, is the historic preservation review process. So currently, just to summarize, we have a review process which is focused around what's called a certificate of appropriateness. A certificate of appropriateness is an approval for any work that's being done in a historic district. So it's either an exterior work or work within a public interior space. There are two tracks that review process can take. One is an administrative review and one is a board level review. With regard to the first discussion and set of recommendations for the committee, they focused on the expansion of the administrative review authority. Currently, our authority is relatively limited. We can approve windows, doors, we can approve minor demolition for things like accessibility or other types of life safety or building codes. We can approve signage, we can approve paint. We can approve a limited amount within the interior. Certainly, everything in non-public interiors may be approved administratively. And the board thought that the current list, which is outlined in the appendix, was rather limiting and was requiring a lot of these very small projects to go to the board when the committee felt confident they could be reviewed administratively. There's also some inconsistency with what the design review board staff can approve administratively and what the historic preservation board staff can approve administratively. So some of these suggestions were to make them more consistent. Number one was sustainable roofing, for example. That could be something like a metal roof that's consistent with the architecture of the building.
But right now, they would have to go to the Historic Preservation Board. They couldn't apply for it and have administrative review. Like, for example, if we have these, the walkthrough permits now. Would roofing be allowed to go through a walkthrough process?
Yeah, I mean, I would think a roof repair, replacement could go through a
And so,
walkthrough.
but in this case, if it was a metal roof, it would have to go first to the Historic Preservation Board.
Correct,
And in this case, you guys would be able to review it.
correct. So that was one. Properties, walls, fences, and gates are not specified as something that staff can review. Within historic districts, outside of historic districts, staff is able to review. In practice, because this becomes extremely cumbersome, we have approved at a staff level property fences that meet all of the minimum code requirements and that meet the certificate of appropriateness criteria. But that's something that's more of a cleanup that I believe would need to be amended to formally give staff that review authority. Minor public interior modifications that do not harm or destroy any significant architectural features within the interior or
So these are
significant
like
materials.
historic lobbies?
Historic lobbies, and it's a relatively common application that goes to the board. Staff spends a lot of time with applicants actually trying to figure out modifying their plans because they don't want to go to the board. But things like adding an extra desk, adding a small bar within the original lobby space, those types of things currently do have to go to the Historic Preservation Board. Creating a small opening for connectivity within an original wall that doesn't have any significant features on the wall would be going to the board currently. So the committee was, thinking that we could be slightly more flexible with minor improvements to public interiors.
I have a question. So, because this is something that until we engaged in this process, I didn't realize. Because I always operated under the presumption that historic preservation review applied to the exterior elements of the building. And in this case, we're learning, at least I'm learning now, that the historic preservation review also applied, I guess like if we're dealing with a historic hotel, let's say, applies to the hallways, I would imagine?
Not the corridors like for the guest rooms. It would not apply in those areas. It would apply in the lobby areas if they had an original dining room. I mean, if you look at huge buildings like the Fontainebleau or the Eden Rock, they have multiple public spaces where they may want to put, I think we worked with the Eden Rock. They went through the board process. They wanted to put a little Starbucks in kind of a corner in one of their public spaces.
And that would have had to have gone to the HPB.
Yes.
And under this process, that wouldn't have to go to the HPB.
Potentially, as long as the staff is able to review it and it satisfies all of the criteria.
Right.
If we determine that it doesn't satisfy the same criteria that the board would review, then we would either request that they make changes to it or send it to the board.
Okay. All right.
Question too.
Commissioner Suarez and then Vice Mayor Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Believe it or not, I got involved in politics because of a certificate of appropriateness. I remember the address, it was 310 Meridian. And
We all remember.
yeah, what they did was not minor on the inside work. I mean, they completely did a whole gut job. And I just want to know what's the difference or what has changed from that particular project to now? Because if they were able to do a complete renovation inside and on the sides of the building and the back of the building, and they didn't have to go to get a certificate of appropriateness, what has changed since then? And maybe you can reference it to that project.
That's a good question, thank you. From what I recall, I don't believe I reviewed that permit, but I'm very familiar with the situation. That was 310 Meridian was originally constructed as an apartment building. Did not have public interior spaces like a lobby or a ballroom or a dining room. Non-public interior spaces like apartment units, even the corridors leading to the apartment units, are not under the jurisdiction of the Historic Preservation Ordinance at all. So we don't review a certificate of appropriateness for those areas of the building. For the exterior, and from what I recall, and I apologize if I'm not getting all the facts straight, there was a lot of window replacement on that building. That is currently allowed. All window and door replacement may be reviewed administratively as long as it's consistent with the historic design. I believe there also may have been a separate entrance added that's required for ADA accessibility. That is also specifically outlined as something that staff is able to review and approve administratively. Minor demolition to accommodate life safety codes, fire codes, and that type of thing. To the best of my recollection, that's my response, but we can certainly talk later if you would like.
And I don't know if the city attorney wants to be recognized?
The only thing I would add, Commissioner Suarez, is I think the big issue with 310 was that the property owner exceeded the scope of what could be approved administratively. Is that right, Debbie?
That was the Jefferson. That was 333 Jefferson, which we did bring back to the board.
Vice Mayor Bond.
I was actually going to reference the project 310 as well. If somebody has a situation where they get administrative approval to replace the windows, and they then, on the job, decide instead of having fixed windows, we're going to have sliders, would they have to come back to, because then the functionality changes, right? So you go from having a window that you can open to a door. But they got window approval. They're not thinking about anything other than this adds value, or I'm already here, what's the difference, who's going to know, or I just don't care, or insert reason here.
There would be an inspection, wouldn't there?
Well, so that's what I'm asking. So if, to get their final CO, there would have to be a final inspection that would match the plans to what was built. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if somebody is not looking super closely and sees there's a new window demarcated on the plans to be here, and there is a new window here, and they didn't look at the plans to see, oh, it's a jalousie window, or it's one of these super long windows that goes like from your knees to the ceiling, but now it's actually not one of those windows, it's a slider door, which then makes it, I guess, technically a window, but it's also an egress point, and changes the way a building could be used, right? You could have people coming in and out all over the place without going through a central check-in point in a residential neighborhood. How would that be stopped or rectified?
So there's a couple things. The chair is correct, there would be inspections, and it would likely, it should be caught at an inspection. Not only by our planning inspector, who does look at it for our design purposes to make sure it's consistent with the plans, but that's also a building violation.
No, I understand that, but
And so they would need to be not approved at CO. They would be required at that point to submit a revision to that permit. So not only would planning review it, but fire would also have to review it, because believe it or not, fire is very concerned with window openings and egress and how they open, but it would need to go through the whole review process. At the point it came to the planning department would look at it to make sure it's consistent, again, with the historical documentation. If it is, we could approve that revision. If it's not, we would stop that permit and say, you know, we cannot approve this administratively, it is not consistent with our criteria, and you need to file an application to the Historic Preservation Board. And at that point, it would be an after-the-fact application, and that does happen.
But they wouldn't be able to occupy the building or lease out spaces or do short-term rentals or anything like it. They could not use it until they rectified the situation, either by bringing it up to an approved plan or taking out the whatever was not being approved. Because, I mean, I don't remember.
But I just want to clarify. Right now, windows are allowed to be reviewed administratively?
Yes.
Okay, and so this specific cleanup that we're doing through the unanimous recommendation of the review committee relates to minor public interior modifications.
And a few other several things that I
Right,
mentioned. Correct.
But right now, this item that we're on, it relates to the minor public interior modification. Windows is something that already exists, and I think we also did create a process where the public needs to be notified of an administrative review process when the whole window situation, and I think I remember sponsoring legislation that there has to be a posting as it relates to the third and Meridian item that came out when at the time Citizen Suarez was appearing to us with the concerns having to do with that project.
That is correct. We do a posting for all administrative certificate of appropriatenesses, and those are also posted on our website.
So I guess what I'm trying to get to, whether it's windows or something else, I don't want people to come in and say, oh, they'll approve this small thing or this minor change, but once I actually do it, I'll do whatever the hell I want. They can do whatever the hell they want, but they'll get caught on the back
They'll
end.
fail their inspection.
Right. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll be honest with you, going to the board doesn't prevent someone from doing that either, because I've seen the board approve certain things, and then an inspection has shown that
It
they
even
did
happens with
something
paint
else.
colors.
have
We're
that-
dealing with that now with a restaurant. They got an approval from one of the boards on a specific paint color, and the shade is just slightly off. And they're being forced to go back before the board
And we're
because they
dealing with
can't
it,
get their approval because their shade is slightly off.
and we're also dealing with that home that's being built with a fence that's the wall that's like abutting the sidewalk on Allison, I think it is. Okay,
All right.
so no system is perfect.
And,
So, yes.
Mr. Chair, this is gonna this cleanup is gonna help with situations like that. For
Well-
shades of color, I mean,
Well,
it's very onerous on a.
that's not included here, but we do have separate legislation that will make its way to this committee at some point having to do with paint colors in commercial buildings. Is that correct, Mr. Director?
Yes, that's on the April 15th agenda.
So we have an item that's going to be coming forward regarding that. Debbie, let's proceed.
Okay, so I'll move on to the second process topic that the committee has
I
recommendations.
just want to make sure, did we cover the minor work involving improvements to public right-of-way easements?
You're correct. I'm skipping ahead. I apologize.
Wishful
So,
thinking, Debbie.
The other items the committee wanted us to explore for administrative review would include minor work involving involvements upon public rights-of-way and easements. This is consistent with the design review board's authority, and I think it makes, a lot of sense to get, especially these public works projects, the small, minor things, reviewed as quick as possible, as we're having a lot of infrastructure upgrades ongoing every day, it seems. The next item was demolition and reconstruction of architectural features in accordance with available historical documentation.
And this is limited strictly just to elements.
Yes, these are architectural elements which are often, and I have a bunch of examples of this, often, projecting features. They could be, usually they're concrete because those are the portions of the building that seem to have structural defects. Projecting elements like an eyebrow, an overhang. We had one project that just went through, or is currently going through the board process now, but had gone back to the board because during construction they realized that their projecting portico-share structure was an unsafe structure. They had to stop construction. They delayed probably a month or two and went back to the board with the same design. They said, we have to reconstruct it exactly how you approved it, but we have to remove it and put it back.
And in this case, what is being recommended is that the architectural feature be no more than 20% of the facade area.
Correct. And we have to have documentation so that it can be restored as close as possible as to how it was historically.
And so I just want to make sure, like, for example, I remember a while back, maybe a year or two ago, there was a hotel in Ocean Drive, one of the iconic hotels on Ocean Drive, and there was concrete issues. It was an architectural element that it was a projection that it had concrete that was falling. That to me is a public safety issue. But in order for them to be able to address that, they would have had to have gone before the Historic Preservation Board. Here, they would be able to go to you guys and be able to get administrative approval.
Correct. And what we've seen in the past is when you have a real life safety issue, we don't delay the removal of an unsafe element. But then what you see is all of these after the fact applications that have gone to the board. And we believe, staff is confident that we have the capability of approving the reconstruction, meaning it needs to be exactly either how the board had approved it originally or what the historical documentation shows administratively. If they want to change the element, that would require going to the Historic Preservation Board.
Vice Mayor Bond.
What if the building doesn't have historic documentation of the element that needs to be recreated once it's removed?
We do a pretty good job at finding stuff, but if we couldn't find, it would be a conjectured element, and then we would have to probably bring that to the board, because part of the criteria would be that you have enough documentation to know how it was originally designed. And sometimes we don't, but that's rare.
Debbie, let's talk about railings.
Okay, so there's two recommendations for railings. The first recommendation is with regard to basically any building, but specific to contributing buildings in historic districts. The committee has recommended that staff be allowed to replace that element, particularly if it was a wood railing, which we have in our historic districts, or a concrete railing that is, having structural issues, that staff be able to approve a replacement railing that matches as close as possible to the historical railing and design features. The second recommendation that I think is part of a separate item on the agenda today is with regard to non-contributing buildings. So these are non-contributing buildings in the historic districts, and what I have seen in the past probably year to 2 years is a lot of non-contributing buildings in our districts were built in the late 60s through the 1970s, even early 1980s. and they have those concrete projecting balconies. And most of those buildings are going through a recertification process. And the railings get flagged for two different reasons, right? They get flagged as part of the structural component of the recertification, and then the fire department is also looking at these very closely because most railings that were installed on a building before 1980 do not meet the current height and rejection requirements of current life safety codes. So what we're seeing is these huge concrete railings, condominium owners coming to us saying, we can't afford to put it back, or it's too heavy. It wasn't a great design to begin with, right? Because you have all this heavy concrete on the ocean projecting out that is going to need all this maintenance for the future and will probably need to be replaced in the next 25 years again. So we've had several building owners, and PJ, I think I sent you a visual for this, because it might be easier for me to show them. Several of these condominium buildings have gone through the Historic Preservation Board process. The board has expressed, frustration and not wanting to see these types of applications. But currently, because they're changing the design, say they want to take the big clunky concrete railing and put a simple metal rail or aluminum rail.
And we have
sometimes
examples
they-
of that. I think
Yeah, I
851
think, PJ
Meridian Avenue was an example. PJ, I'm not sure if you're able
I
to
don't know if it's even-
display those images.
Just give me 1 second. I'm pulling it up for you right now.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Wasn't there, when Nancy Liebman was on MBU and I was on MBU, there was, I can't remember the details, but there was a big to-do. Tom, I'm sure you remember because Nancy was in your office a lot. There was a big to-do about railings and variances, fire code variances for historic properties. It was kind of along these lines, but wasn't exactly. Do you remember what it was?
The Wendy Rugg ordinances.
The Bell Plaza one was a little different because that's outside of an historic district, but they wanted to maintain that railing design. Unfortunately, it didn't meet the current requirements of the life safety code. And the fire marshal at the time had very little latitude to vary from that because it was not an historic building. And the fire marshal at the time actually went to Tallahassee, lobbied the state to change the law to allow them to do it. On the historic properties, what Nancy advocated was allowing for railing design to retain to the greatest extent possible the original historic design by more limited intervention. So for instance, if you had a 30-inch railing, perhaps you could go to 36 by putting a top bar, but you keep the rest of the railing. Or if the openings are so wide, perhaps you put a glass panel behind it. And we've seen examples of that, like at the Victor. If you go to the Victor lobby, the upper level railing, they put a glass panel to retain the original railing, which was still existing.
Right. And it was that also applied to stairwells, I think, right?
And
Staircases.
stairwells, yep.
Okay. Oh, good, I
and
can remember some things.
I have to say, I find those, I get why it's done for safety purposes, but I think that glass takes away from those historic railings. I mean, kids were kids, and back then too.
I know, but everyone's litigious now.
I know. All right. Peter, were we able to, there we go. There we have 851 Meridian, which is on the top, I guess, Debbie, is the example.
Correct, and you can see the previously existing railings were a cast concrete large block system that was causing.
Becomes structural issues on
Correct.
these buildings.
Yeah.
And so the picture below is what the board had approved and what was installed on the building, and I think the residents were very happy.
But they
obtain
had to go through
approval.
the Historic Preservation Board process.
Correct.
Which added time and expense to the residents of those condominiums.
Correct. The next, there's a couple more examples. This is, a different typology. This is on the ocean, so even
That's a
more
Riviera.
vulnerable. Is the Riviera Plaza condominium. They wanted to change their masonry and aluminum railings to entirely glass. They went to the board, and the board approved the change.
And so explain to me, because the Riviera that's in a historic district, that's in the architecture district.
It is not in the architectural district, but
in
it
the
is in
frame.
the Collins Waterfront Historic District. It's a non-contributing building.
Right.
But nonetheless, the rules aren't different for non-contributing or contributing. If you're changing a design element, you would go through the Historic Preservation Board process.
Because you're in a district.
Yeah, and the committee, we had a really talented contractor who works with historic buildings as a member of our committee, and I think all of the committee members are very sensitive to what these larger condominiums are going through right now with their recertifications. And they just felt that this may be able to provide some relief.
And
to
this
those
is, I mean,
sorts
and
of
a lot of
buildings.
buildings are dealing with this. Like, for example, you have Trident Tower that's around there. You have Marisol Towers, you have Riviera, you have the King David, you have so many buildings that are around there, Club Atlantis, that fall within one of these historic districts, yet these buildings are not historic in nature, but their residents are being assessed great amounts of money in order to engage in this work. And now they have to hire lobbyists, they have to go through the process and the time of taking this through a board, which can take time. And this will streamline that.
Correct.
I think you have another example.
Yes, the latest example is a building I'm currently working with that is in the process of submitting an application. If we could go to the next slide. This is on Euclid. This is another property that went through the board process. The last one is the one I'm working with now. So this project also went through the Historic Preservation Board process relatively recently I think at the end of 2023. They had gone and gotten approval, but it was a very similar situation. It's kind of the same story over and over. They were going, in this case, it was a bit more challenging. They were going through a recertification process. They hired a contractor. They had contractor issues. One of the contractors, because they're looking at the structural report from the engineer and saying, okay, all of these things need to be repaired. When the contractor was trying to follow the structural engineer's direction, he just removed the balconies because in his mind, the contractor thought that was structural repair. So this went as an after the fact. All the entire slab, in most cases for this building, and the railings were removed. This particular one, is probably the least well done of all of them because it's just that, basic vertical picket. But this went through the board process. They delayed a lot of their construction to get through the board process. And given the circumstances, and hearing from the residents of the building, the board did approve it.
All right. And your last example?
The last example is a building on Lenox that I'm currently working with now. I mean, you can see they're doing other repairs to this building. They're in a difficult situation where I think the fire department has been by as well, so they've kind of put some plywood up to try and satisfy the 4-inch rejection in some areas. And non-contributing building, they're looking at, about a 4-month process to move forward.
So it seems like the majority of the buildings that would be benefiting from this are kind of our inventory of naturally occurring affordable housing who need the most help the fastest because they're being hit with the same assessments as everybody else with, not to make generalizations, but with likely less opportunity to dip into their pocketbooks to fix things. So this would help alleviate some of that pressure.
And one of the things that I like that the committee recommended is not only the streamlining of the process, allowing the planning department to do that administrative review, but that they're recommending that design guidelines be developed to allow staff to approve railing designs, alternate railing designs for non-contributing buildings, but having that design guideline in place so there's that roadmap. Okay, you might need to go away from this concrete. It might be costly to replicate that concrete, and we know that concrete and the weight on that concrete could create greater structural pressures in the future. But what is it that we want to take? What direction do we want to go in? And having that pre-approved design guideline could be helpful.
Yes.
All right. Great. With that, should we go into the two-step process?
Absolutely,
I'm
okay.
very excited about the two-step process. You have great vision.
Yeah, and the committee was very excited about it too. So the two-step process, we currently have this process outlined in the code. You know, when we were going through our discussions with the committee, it dawned on me that, yes, we do have this process because you don't often think of it because it's never been used. One of the
That's the
reasons
problem.
it's never been used, at least, I don't know, Tom's been here longer than me, but since I've been here, almost 2 decades, it hasn't been used. So when I was reading through the section, it was very unclear how to use it, what the requirements were, who was eligible for this two-step process. The existing code says the Historic Preservation Board will determine who is eligible for this process. Well, if you're not allowed to file the application, how do you get in front of the Historic Preservation Board to make that decision? So the committee recommended that staff prepare a much more detailed process for this. They did believe that for the very large projects, this would be extremely beneficial. Very large projects such as, the Raleigh Hotel project, the Shore Club project, the Ritz-Carlton project, they don't get reviewed in one hearing. And I
We're
brought
talking about
a visual.
properties with lot sizes of 1 acre or more.
Yeah, and I brought a visual so you can see the magnitude of what's required for a full application to the Historic Preservation Board, right?
And PJ, can you zoom in on that? How many pages? That's like,
This is, I think, I had the number. I think it's over 200 pages.
all right. And that's just to have like this preliminary first review at the Historic Preservation Board.
This would be, right, but we require to get in front of the board, we require a full application. So that includes, minutia details of public interiors, all materials, everything has to be finalized to get
Where
in
your
front of the board.
elevator is at, where your escape route is at.
Correct.
The place, when in reality, we want to be focusing, okay, your massing, how far back are you from the setbacks? How tall is your building? Something that's more conceptual for that first.
Right. I think the intent
Review.
behind our existing two-step process was to provide these larger projects an opportunity to go in front of the board and have the board really deliberate issues of compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood, scale, massing. Those are the big issues, and that's often like with this project and with other projects, the board ends up spending a lot of time on that, and they often have comments, they often have conditions or request changes. So if the applicant is submitting a full package and the board starts asking for some modifications to the location of the addition, to the height of the addition, that's a ripple effect to the point
Hundreds
where
of pages of plans.
and then it would have to come back anyways with a fully revised plan. And it's hard for the board, more than anything from my perspective, it's hard for the board to digest so much information where they may have 6 or 7 other applications on the agenda when they often don't focus on things like the details of the restoration of the historic building because there's so much else to focus in on, that the two-step process allows the board to approve, basically a site plan with the general with the massing. It will require detailed information, either engineered or architecturally, signed and sealed drawings that are accurate. But it would not require all of the vast amount of details. And we do think that would be helpful because then if their site plan gets approved, they can come back with all of those details and the board will really have the time and the energy to focus on that. So we do think it will.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
PJ, there's some noise that's coming in. Just wanted to alert it to you through the sound system. All right, we just muted that.
We do think it will be a huge assistance in saving of a lot of resources for applicants, but we also think it'll probably result in better projects because the board will have more time and feel more relaxed to take small bites out of a project than to try to digest the whole thing in one hearing.
Okay, all right. And this would apply to properties on lot sizes over 1 acre
Correct.
and projects or developments over 75,000 gross square feet.
Either or.
So this is
Yes.
for the really large projects in our city.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any feedback on that?
Nope,
All right.
I like it.
Okay, the next recommendation was with regard to the existing transportation analysis and mitigation plan requirements. Currently, the resiliency code requires any project going before the Historic Preservation Board that is over 5,000 gross new square feet, or if it's a multifamily building that is greater than 4 new residential units. If you meet that threshold, then you're required to submit the Transportation Analysis and Mitigation Plan, which does funnel through our Transportation Department, who does a great job in reviewing these, but it does add a significant amount of additional time. It also does require, through that process with transportation, a consultant review. And the committee did believe that this was burdensome on smaller projects. You know, a 5,000 gross square feet is not a large. Remember, gross square feet includes any parking areas, any roof decks, any outdoor terrace areas.
Sure. And I've heard over the years that this is the biggest delay that applicants often face are the traffic studies and the peer review of these traffic studies. And right now, I think our regulations even says, you know, if you're doing an addition that adds 4 new units, well, you know, what's the impact of 4 new units?
Yep.
And so now we're gonna delay a project through this bureaucracy and creating, you know, keeping a burdensome process. This would actually just streamline that, where we're going to say, really, this is for the larger projects. Do we really need these reviews? And what's going to be the threshold?
The committee
We can't hear you. All right.
The committee recommended the threshold be 50,000 square feet, which is consistent with the planning board's conditional use review.
Okay.
So there are projects that aren't captured by the planning board because they're in residential districts, but they would be captured by HPB because we would, for over 50,000 square feet, the recommendation is to still require this type of study.
I have a macro question for you, or for Tom, or whoever. I'd like this being consistent across our different disciplines and our different districts. I know that one size does not fit all, but I so clearly remember, if you were on the planning board or you had left already, but there's a resident who came, Nick, you probably remember, who would come and was pulling his hair out. He's like, it's just not consistent from block to block, from door to door. Our code isn't consistent. And so this doesn't address all the issues, but I really like the cleaning out to make it more consistent. And so I'm wondering, if we're doing this, are there other opportunities to kind of make things more consistent, like we're doing here, in other ways that I don't know the code well enough to capture? So obviously that's not a thing like, yes, here are 5 examples, but I would put it to you guys to maybe think about it, talk about it, and come back to us and say, here are a handful of other examples or opportunities that may or may not be historic districts or contributing or whatever, but it's the same issue, just in a different section. So I don't know if that needs to be a motion, or I can just ask you to remember to do it, or I don't know what the right process is.
And we can also meet with you, if you like, with staff to identify specific issues.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Great, very good.
All right. Good
The
recommendation.
next process recommendation by the board is to expand the existing section that is entitled the Special Review Procedure for Single-Family Homes. Currently, we do have expanded authority to review single-family homes in historic districts for exterior changes. However, we do not have expanded authority to approve additions over a certain size. So we can approve up to 2-story additions. But the way the historic preservation regulations were structured, and I believe the intent when these thresholds were put in place was for larger commercial and multifamily residential buildings. It was structured to limit the percentage of any new addition that staff can review and approve administratively to a percentage of the existing square feet of the building. So if you look at, our historic homes in historic districts, they're primarily in the western part of Flamingo Park and in Palmview. Well, these existing homes in our historic districts are very small. Some of them they probably range between maybe 1,300 or 1,400 square feet to 2,500 square feet. So if you had a 1,700 square foot home and you wanted to do an addition, currently you'd be allowed to do a 300 square foot addition administratively. So it's not proportional, I think, to the intent of that regulation. So the committee did recommend that staff be able to approve, in addition to the special review procedure that's already in place, to approve additions that don't exceed the allowable setbacks, lot coverage, or unit size or height administratively.
So
Provided they're not substantially visible from the public right-of-way. So this would not include an addition at the front of the property, for example.
and this is great because what happens is that what happened? I'm sorry, I got distracted. I get distracted very
I know,
easily.
I do too.
Talk about dogs.
I'll talk about dogs. There you go. What happens is the moment they have to go before the Historic Preservation Board, they'll just come in to request a demolition permit at that point. They won't come to say, well, if I'm just going to go through the Historic Preservation Board, let me just go and get everything that I can. In this case, by avoiding the Historic Preservation Board to make an addition to a house, we're in essence helping make these homes more usable for modern standards, while at the same time helping encourage people to keep the homes by avoiding having to go through the regulatory process of the board.
Correct. And the committee had another recommendation that if this should move forward, that at a minimum requirement, the property owner should be required to send a mail notice to his adjacent neighbors to notify them in advance of any permit being issued. And staff thinks that is a very good idea as well.
And it's mainly Flamingo West and Parkview.
Palmview, yes,
Palmview,
correct.
sorry. Yes.
Okay. Moving on, we have two cleanup items really finish up the process recommendations. One was to remove what we believe is an obsolete notice requirement specific to continued items on the board's agenda only. This, I believe, used to be in all four land use board notice requirements. It was removed from all the board requirements, but it was left in, speaking to your consistency issue, left in somehow in the historic preservation section. This basically says if an item is continued, it requires a notice in the Miami Herald 15 days before. We're not noticing in the
Creates
Herald.
consistency between the boards.
Correct, just to make a consistent noticing process for all four of our land use boards. And the final recommendation was actually brought to our attention by Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County authorizes the city through enabling legislation to have our own historic preservation program. Communities that do not wish to opt into an independent program are under the jurisdiction of Miami-Dade County. So the county has minimum threshold requirements for the city of Miami Beach to meet in order to have an approvable historic preservation ordinance. We submit a annual report every year to the county. They're always very happy with the work we do, but this year they did point out the fact that we are not consistent with one of their minimum standards, and that is the inclusion of procedures to remove historic designation. So the minute I found out that we were not in compliance with one of the minimum requirements, I had a conversation with the chief of historic preservation at Miami-Dade County. She explained it to me. She gave me the county's language and said it's not to encourage the removal of designation. It's just to have a process in the event that someone requests this. And basically what the county's language is and what the committee had recommended is that it be to amend or rescind any historic designation. The process shall comply in the same manners and procedures as the original designation.
Okay.
So, for example, in our historic districts, someone wanted to remove a designation. That would require hearings in front of the Historic Preservation Board, a hearing in front of the Planning Board, and ultimately 2 hearings before the City Commission.
And that's just for us to be in compliance. In order to maintain our historic preservation ordinance, we need to comply with the county requirement, and the county requires us, since we have our own historic preservation code, to have this element within it.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about incentives for preservation, so that we don't have to use that section of the code.
Okay. Yes, moving on to incentives. The first incentive the committee discussed and was very positive about would be potentially expanding our current ad valorem historic tax exemption program. The city currently has a program eligible to single-family homes only. The board or the committee wanted to discuss expanding that to all properties, commercial, multifamily properties. And it's interesting to note that, because I have had conversations with Miami-Dade County about this too. Miami-Dade County currently, for their portion of the taxes, currently offers this program for all buildings within the city of Miami Beach. And they, of course, would support the city doing that. I confirmed with them that they would be okay with that. And this would just be for the city's portion of the taxes. So we don't see a ton of applications. I'm still getting the final data from the county about how many applications they have processed over the years for the county's portion of the taxes. But potentially a reason why, maybe because the county's portion is about 1/3 of the tax bill.
We are the significant part of it.
Right.
And so this would offer a tax exemption for the renovation to the historic property, and it would allow for the exemption of up to 100% of the increase in taxable building value for the improvements.
Correct, and
So
that's
that would
the
be
key
significant.
phrase. Well, it's not the property value. It would be the increase in building value after renovations are done. It could be very significant
could be
if
a
it
lot.
was a very large project. And
Especially when you take into consideration the city's portion and the county portion.
Correct, and that is for a period not to exceed 10 years. So after 10 years, that would get rolled back. The increased building value would get rolled back into the tax bill for both the county and the city.
So this is the same thing we already do for single-family homes, but extending it for multifamily and commercial buildings.
Correct.
And this is significant. Vice Mayor Bott.
So I love this. I'm curious, Nick, maybe I misunderstood, but I remember when I was first elected, we talked about how to incentivize workforce housing. And I had an idea, I brought to you an idea that was similar to this for new development, to defer taxes or, the differential. And I was told that we were preempted by the state.
But that's for new development.
I understand that. So the question is, and I don't want to limit this, I think this is great because we want to see more preservation or redevelopment and as opposed to building new, like that was by far the greenest way to redevelop and put more better housing stock in. But if this exists for one type of housing, why can't we use this to incentivize another type of housing when it's on the books?
State law specifically provides for an ad valorem property tax exemption for improvements to historic buildings. So this is pursuant to an express statute. Miami-Dade County has adopted an ordinance that would apply to any development. Our ordinance only applies to single family. So the recommendation of the committee would be to expand the program to take advantage of the full benefits of what the statute allows.
I mean, look, I think all these other things are really good. I like them.
This
We should be shouting from the rooftops. I mean, to your point, Commissioner Rosen-Gonzalez, we've been talking about how to, is it better to buy new or to redevelop? And, a good case can be made for either, depending on the circumstances, but if now properties that exist know that they can do some pretty significant upgrades and expand the size of their properties, add 4 units, so you go from being a 6-unit multifamily building to 10-unit, that's not nothing. And if a bunch, I'm thinking just of North Beach, and we have plenty of them, with a little bit room to maneuver, right? Like, we don't want to have no green space, but there is some room to maneuver up there. And all of a sudden, one of the things we keep hearing is, we can't do it, it's too expensive, it's not worth the effort. Well, all of a sudden, that's no longer true. If and when this gets adopted, I would like to very strongly recommend that there is public outreach, community meetings.
That's in the works.
Yeah,
for this.
like specifically for this one. Everything else is great, but this is the one that can really move the needle and can happen the fastest versus a new development that'll take, 2 years to get permitted and 3 years to get built and find the funding and buy the land and all that stuff.
And we've tried to do this in the past, and there was not the political wherewithal to get this to the finish line. And I hope that with our renewed focus on historic preservation and the challenges and the threats that we see to historic preservation, that this tax exception to the commercial property, to the multifamily property that invest in their preservation, make it the very best incentive that we can offer to preserve our architectural heritage in Miami Beach. Commissioner Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a great learning experience for me. Commissioner Butt mentioned you would go from, as an example, you go from 4 units to 6 units. How are you increasing FAR, or how are you actually increasing units in the example you gave?
I just pulled that out of thin air.
Through the chair. Yes.
Sorry, through the chair. I just pulled that out of thin air for an example. If somebody were like, oh, I really would like to improve my building and I have room to add some units.
Okay. I want to be clear that.
No, it's not an FAR
Okay.
thing. It's just like if somebody owned a property and said, boy, there's an opportunity here, there's all this unused land on the lot and I could do something here, or I could make my property a nicer place to live. I could put in central air, I could replace the roof, but it's too expensive.
But you can also through reconfiguration increase the amount of units in a historic building for as long as it is consistent within the density requirements under the comprehensive plan. Is that correct, Mr. Attorney?
Yes.
So you have the ability to go from 4 units to, let's say, 6 units through an approved reconstruction for as long as you are within density limits, and that does happen on a regular basis. For example, when we were talking about our transportation study requirements, if you add more than 4 units to an existing building, it would trigger a transportation study, which delays the process. So there is the ability to do it, Commissioner Suarez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Yeah, it just caught my attention when there was a mention of green space and possibly adding more over that green space. I just wanted to make sure that this doesn't allow that administratively to happen.
No.
Right. Okay.
No. This, any addition to a property would have to comply with the current land development
Yeah, and I'm
regulations.
not suggesting, nor would I ever suggest that we pave Paradise to put up a parking lot or 2 additional units. But if you are sitting on a multifamily property in a historic district that was built in the 1940s or 50s, that may not have the most beneficial use of space on the lot, and there's an opportunity to do something with it, but you've never considered reimagining how to reconfigure the space because it didn't make economic sense. Now you have the opportunity to have the conversation, whereas before you never did.
But I just want to clarify, I just want to make sure that the record is clear, that the exception applies only to qualifying improvements of the historic property. So it wouldn't apply to new construction.
No.
It would apply only to qualifying improvements. Debbie, is that correct?
Partially correct. Just to add to that, my conversations with the county tax appraiser and the historic preservation chief is that small additions attached to the building, So if you had a rooftop addition, or if you put a rear addition on your property to add additional units, that potentially could be qualifying as an improvement to the existing building. If you were approved to build an addition detached, like a separate little building in the
ADU.
back, that, from my understanding, would not be a qualifying improvement.
But, you know, as we read about affordable housing solutions all over the country, there are lots of different ways to do it, right? So a separate ADU would work in Bay Shore, where a lot of the single-family homes already have those little guest cottages in the back, and that's a thing that already exists. And we've got legislation to incentivize new ADUs to be structured. I don't know if anybody's applied for that, but that is a small tool in our toolbox. If you have something here where you have, you know, maybe your building has 4 units on one side and 3 on the other side, you could potentially do a 4th little unit there, and now you have another incremental. And I know this doesn't move the needle, but it all adds up. And anything that we can do to encourage owners to think about how do we take better care of our buildings, because the other thing is, we don't just want people to live in really crappy rundown buildings. We would like them to be able to live in affordable places with central air and windows that open and floorboards that aren't wildly uneven. And so if we have things that can incentivize people to take better care of their building, provide better quality of life for our residents, and protect our historic culture.
I'm very excited about this item. I'm telling you, we were in my briefing, and I'm just so proud of the work that Debbie has done and of the committee that we put together, because it really has been professionally driven recommendations to help our community and better preserve our historic character. So Debbie, let's talk about TDRs and TDDs.
Okay, the TDR/TDD, which is transfer of development rights or a transfer of development density, is a more complex program that we don't currently in the city have a structure for. As part of I think this was item number 2 on the agenda today, staff did prepare a memo that outlines an initial structure of how such a program could be put in place in the city of Miami Beach, taking into consideration comments that we received at I believe it was the November Land Use Committee, specific to having a sunset period and specific to certain areas, kind of a smaller area.
Washington 17th.
Perhaps, right, including this as part of the residential use incentives, where we have Lincoln Road, 17th Street, and Washington Avenue as a potential. One of the things that we pointed out and we think is critical before this goes too far into any formal recommendations is to have an economic study, a market study for such a program. Best practices throughout the country have all indicated that without this type of study, there's less likelihood that any program like this would be successful. There needs to be a market for not only the purchase, but also for the sale of these development rights. There also needs to be appropriate ratios put in place for what can be sold and what can be purchased. So it is difficult. There also needs to be a certain saturation level. If there's too many available, that they're also not likely to be successful. If there's too little available for the needs of the purchaser, that's also likely not to be successful. There's different ways of structuring this. We had noted that the 2 main ways are for the developer to make I mean, all of this is a private transaction, but the 2 main ways is at the time the developer needs them to go individually to a property owner and purchase them at the time he's getting his project approved. Right. The other option, which seems to have more success throughout the country, is to treat them like commodities, to basically allow them to be sold to anyone at any point and have what a lot of communities do is they have what they call a transfer development rights bank, where it's a central location that has either purchased these and can negotiate with developers to sell them. So it's, I think this is out of the planning department's wheelhouse in terms of the expertise for this type of study. And we are recommending that before we issue any formal recommendations or more specificity, that we do go ahead and hire a consultant to perform this study.
And I think, clearly we need to understand, what the administrative costs are with implementing a program like these, the legal fees, the monitoring, the market facilitation for it. We want to make sure that there's even a market for it. Are there buyers and sellers and the risks involved with it, and evaluating, who benefits most from a TDR program and how to mitigate the disparities in accessing these programs. So as part of the recommendation that we have before us today would be to conduct an overall economic study on what establishing a TDR program could be, so we can see what those economic benefits and drawbacks could be and better inform our decision making.
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Bond and then Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez.
So I would actually go a little bit further than that, and I would take the TDR, TDD, and take it out of all these other things and treat it very separately. Because I think we're going to be enthusiastically endorsing all of these things. I have significant concerns about doing TDRs here. It's not like we have a lot of underdeveloped land in the city, and we already are talking about doing potentially some very specific and delimited upzoning in areas where we could maybe afford to do that, which then would also be the receiving areas for any TDRs. I don't think, and we have a history, not anybody here, but we have a history of, as a city, of giving people an inch and they take a mile, and that's how you end up with, a tower at 5th and Alton that you can see from Mid-Beach, and another tower at 72nd and Dickens, I guess the cross street is, that you can see almost from Mid-Beach. And so, given our history, given the players in the market, and given the reality of our geography and topography and built environment, I don't think, and I'm the first to say, let's go explore it, but I don't think that this TDR should be something we endorse as completely as this, and I would like to separate it because
That's the intent. The intent is to keep that as a separate item. Tom, I think the intent is to continue to keep that on the agenda.
That's correct.
as a separate, so it's gonna come out of this.
Yes.
So when we vote to say, yes, let's approve all these or recommend it, it will be all of these except for this.
That's correct.
Because there's also gonna be the cost of doing a study, and given what we know, we're losing $7 million right off the top next year in our budget because of the DMV situation, is this $200,000 or $500,000?
And I think they may have, Mr. Director, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are looking within your departmental budget because the dollars may exist potentially to hire someone to do this economic study?
Correct. We think that we may have the funds already. We do want to confirm what the cost is, and this would go to the commission as a recommendation for the commission to authorize it. Madam Vice Chair.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk about the single-family zoning incentives.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Yeah, Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez.
I think this is, no, I think it's great. I mean, I'm not on this committee, but I'm glad that I'm here to witness this because I think it's really cool stuff. And I do think that the TDRs are important because it offers an economic incentive. Do I love them? No. But do I understand that we have to? I don't know.
That's my
That's
concern.
what, but it could potentially encourage somebody who was not going to, renovate to do so if as long as we voted on it, I don't think it would be a big problem. But I do think that that's a super economic incentive. Also, I can't believe you were able to get the administration to agree to a tax exemption. This tax exemption is so powerful. I think that any building owner who builds within the zoning that they currently have, instead of trying to go above and beyond, should get that same tax exemption. Now, I was told that we could not do a tax exemption, and now
But this
there's
already
tax
exists.
exemption?
This has always existed.
It has?
For at least 15 years. This has existed. We've had it in Miami Beach for a long time. It's been limited only to single-family homes. In the past, we've tried to expand this beyond single-family homes. We haven't had the political support to expand it, of course, because we're talking about a tax impact. And what does a tax impact affect? It affects our general fund. But I think this puts our money where our mouth is. It puts our money where our values are aligned. It puts our values to say that we want to support the preservation of historic properties, even when they're not single-family homes. They're worth preserving, and we're willing to make a 100% tax exemption to the city on those investments for a period of 10 years.
And wait, can I, because I
Yes,
was just
Commissioner
asking these
Rosenthal.
questions. Here, the only thing that I would add, and what I think would make this even better, is like if somebody with a historic building decides that they want to renovate it and they want to build as of right, they should get the tax exemption on whatever they add on to the property.
So this tax exemption for improvements to existing historic buildings is specifically authorized under state law. So we would be limited to the confines that for what.
Of just that.
Yeah.
Even if they just if they add on a couple of units, they're still getting the tax exemption?
Well, and what Debbie explained is that in certain instances, minor additions to an existing building could qualify, but a brand new, let's say a brand new building at the rear of the property, that would probably not qualify.
How could we look at that statute and see? Because maybe if you kept the entire historic structure and just added onto it, and let's say that they had 50 feet in the historic district, fine. This is what we want to encourage. You want to encourage 5 foot, resident 5 foot, 50 foot, 75 foot buildings, not 400. Yeah, not 150. So if there was a way that you could look at that law and see if they build within the right and they keep the historic, and they renovate the historic portion, they should get they should get the tax exemption, and that would be a real financial incentive, I think. And I don't know if that's a possibility, Nick, but we can.
Well, let's check in with Debbie on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we can certainly have those conversations. The Miami-Dade County Property Appraiser is actually the entity that makes that final determination of what the value of the qualifying improvements are. And the county, in my discussion, the county also has regulations that we need to follow. I can certainly, and these are discussions I've had previously with Miami-Dade County, trying to fight for historic single-family homes and additions, and even with their application, trying to fight to get more for our historic renovations. So I can certainly, as part of this, if this moves forward, have those conversations. And get you some more information, but it's really the tax appraiser
Because I think
that's making that final determination.
There's
Because-
3 more
Believe it or not.
points that we gotta get to.
Okay, and this is my final thing that I want to add, and that's it.
Yes.
On Sunday, I was at the Taste of the Fountain, the Normandy Circle, which I hadn't been to like in 6 months or something. Well, what I saw was an organic rehabilitation, you know what I mean? Or organic
Shouting about it for
blossoming of this
amazing.
neighborhood. And that's what I always said would happen if we held off and didn't allow this type of development. We would get that organic style. And what you have right now is a very cool, burgeoning gastro bar, cool
Jewelry,
scene,
candles,
jewelry, a
clothing.
candle shop opened. Now you have La Poubelle, that little French cabaret.
But as it
I mean,
relates to this item, sorry, is that we,
okay.
Yes.
But that if we insist on stuff like this and we hold the line on the other stuff, that's what we will get, and that's what we want to get, because that's so special, and you can't build that.
yeah,
You just can't.
what I've been saying.
this
for
will help.
years.
This will help. Thank you, Commissioner. Debbie.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The final items, we have the single-family home zoning incentives. This is currently available that reduces setbacks for additions to architecturally significant pre-1942 homes that are being retained and restored. They're allowed to follow the same setbacks that exist for new additions. It also allows for additional lot coverage and unit size. The committee strongly encouraged the city to look at also allowing these incentives, which primarily in the historic districts, it would benefit the setbacks to continue for small additions.
So this creates consistency.
Creates consistency, with the exception, the committee was strong in the fact that they did not believe the additional unit size that's allowed outside of historic districts should be available to historic districts.
But this relates more to setbacks and lot coverages.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions on that?
Nope.
All right. And
Finally, the committee, as referred by the mayor and commission, the committee did discuss two items that are on today's land use agenda. These are the incentives for property owners to restore and rehabilitate historic resources. There's one for North Beach, and there's one item for Flamingo Park. So the committee discussed those items. And while they believed that it could be somewhat beneficial, that they stated it's unlikely to really move the needle because the financial incentives provided would probably be too low to encourage someone to go ahead and renovate their entire building. But they did believe that those ideas, coupled with a larger incentives package, would be helpful. And so they were positive regarding the individual incentives, but as long as they were coupled with larger incentives to make a bigger impact, they believed that they were beneficial.
So in theory, thank you. In theory, they could be, just recommendation number 5 and 6 of this package and just fold it into this. Okay, so that's what I'd like to see done.
Okay. Then one of the other things that's under the other category, that I'm going to take the liberty because the chair of the committee brought it up, is the additional funding to support historic preservation review at the staff level. I think if we create all these new categories for administrative review, that needs to come with support for staff, and so that we don't end up with a backlog in that review process, as well for any new incentive program that could potentially be created, like the ad hoc historic preservation tax exemption program. And I would like for us to consider that. With that, Debbie, anything else that you would like to add?
No, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for establishing this committee. I think they all did great work. I want to thank Nick Kalergis and Jake Seiberling, who really assisted with all of the work that was done.
And again, I really want to recognize this committee. For a long time, Debbie, I've spoken to you, to Tom, about the possibility of creating this committee to update our 40-year-old historic preservation code, bring it up to modern standards, and help support preservation. This committee has delivered such excellent work. And like any person that serves in a public seat like ours, we're only as good as those who support us. And you are a big part of this work, Debbie. And I'm so grateful to you, to Nick, to the planning department for having facilitated this process. Is there any other dialogue from the dais regarding these recommendations?
I would just add, this is excellent work. And for anybody who's not seen or witnessed, experienced Debbie Tackett doing a tour of a historic facility, run, don't walk next time you get the opportunity. She is a treasure and a font of knowledge and deeply loves what she does. And so thank you.
Are there members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 hands up on Zoom. Actually, Commissioner Dominguez has her hands up. And
All
we
right.
have one other hand up.
Let's recognize Commissioner Dominguez, and then we'll recognize the members of the public. Commissioner Dominguez, welcome.
Hi there, Mr. Oops. This has been such a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I know that Commissioner Bott and I submitted a couple items for the historic ones in Flamingo Park and also in North Beach. So I'll do some more research to see what I can couple those incentives with. But thank you to the chair for bringing the ad hoc committee, and thank you to the ad hoc committee and also to Debbie Tackett, because this was phenomenal. And I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, both Commissioner Bond and Commissioner Dominguez, for the items that you referred to the committee. It really was very substantive. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, we have Kent Robbins.
Kent, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
All right. This is Kent Robbins. I have a question, maybe addressed more to the attorney than to the board. I know in the city charter, there are specific provisions concerning guidelines of the Historic Preservation Board and specific prohibitions from the Historic Preservation Board reducing the requirements and stringent requirements of the HPB board without referring the matter to the electorate for a vote, citywide vote on the reduction of the requirements. I think it would have to first go to the city commission. The city commission then would have to set it down for an election. What provisions have you considered as far as which items that you're suggesting changes would require citywide approval by referendum?
Thank you, Mr. Robbins, for your questions. I think I don't want our city attorney to be placed in a position of. Well, up to you. You're the attorney.
Mr. Chairman, the only comment I would make to the committee is that we will ensure that any amendments to the land development regulations that come out of this discussion comply with applicable law.
Perfect. Yes. All right. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none in person, none on Zoom. All right, Commissioner Rosa Gonzalez.
I see Mohammed in the audience. Mohammed, you're not going to be happy about this recommendation, though. Okay. I had a resident, a few residents, business owners in the community come to me because of some of our distance. Oh.
Is this on item 1? On the.
No, this is item 16. You didn't call it?
No.
Oh, I just.
No, we're not there
I only
yet.
have.
Okay,
15
let me
minutes
just
to
close
share
this
my-
item.
Oh,
Okay, so there's, all right. Okay, so, we have items 1 through 7 with the recommendations of the committee. Let's, Mr. Attorney or Mr. Director, should we do a motion approving the recommendations on items 1 through 7, except for item number 2, and continue item 2 for the market study to a future meeting?
Yes, and if it could be by acclamation, to bring a draft ordinance to the city commission for a referral to the planning board in accordance with the recommendations in the LUSC memo, which referenced the report that Debbie just presented.
Yes,
I'll
so
make that motion.
it's moved by the vice chair, second by Commissioner Suarez. I think by acclamation, we can show that done. Thank you, colleagues, on that. And on the market study, do we need to make a motion to the city commission to conduct the market study to analyze the pros and the cons of the LDR?
Yes.
Of the
Yes.
TDR program?
But do we know the cost? Like, how are we making a motion on something where we don't?
We would bring that to the commission.
The staff would bring that to the city commission. All right, is there a motion on that? I'll move it. It's been moved by Commissioner Suarez, seconded by the chair, and we show that adopted by acclamation. All right, by acclamation, and then we're gonna continue item number 2, which is the actual creation of TDR program. We're gonna continue that item because we're not making a recommendation. We need a study to tell us, is there a market demand, how it would work, before we make a recommendation on that. Is that correct, Mr. Director?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
So we will continue item number 2 on the creation of a TDR program to a future meeting. All right,
That's
with
correct.
that, we conclude this section of our agenda. And out of a courtesy to Commissioner Rosa Gonzalez, who is visiting us today, and welcome, Commissioner. It's always good to have you here, and it's good to see our good friend Muhammad Islam in the audience. I will take item number 16 out of order.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Fernandez. Okay, so this is about our distance separation in North Beach regarding tobacco products. And let me explain why I would like to loosen the restrictions. For example, if Publix wanted to renovate an existing supermarket, they won't because they're a non-conforming use and they would lose their right to sell tobacco. Similarly, some of our storefronts that are actually operating and successful have licenses. In this case, I had a business come to me. They have a thriving business, and it happens to be a liquor store, but because of this law, they can't sell tobacco products. Now, I understand, I know, Commissioner Fernandez, that, there's been some bans across the city, and a lot of people don't, and I know that this is not really the direction that we want to be going in, but the question is, do we really want to punish existing businesses with that non-conforming use they have a license to sell liquor, but they can't sell the tobacco products. So I said I would bring it forth. I'm looking at the recommendation from the administration, which says, do give it an unfavorable recommendation. But I would argue that at a time when we have so many vacant storefronts, that we should consider the fact that we might end up hurting businesses that are struggling to survive. And do we really want to do this? And if we did want to help out this business owner, Tom, I know that we had a meeting, and what was your recommendation? I know what your recommendation is, but how could we fix this problem so that we do not put somebody out of business or harm their business, or they have to change their business model just because we've done some bans?
Through the chair.
Yes.
I don't believe that the person who contacted me was in North Beach, and it was a couple of months ago. But this is a small business who has a similar situation. He actually has a state license to sell tobacco, and he's in between two stores that do sell beer and tobacco. He only sells beer, whatever exact details it is. And so he loses business because people come in and say, a six-pack and a pack of smokes. And he's like, well, I can give you the beer, but I can't give you the pack of smokes. And so they're like, forget it, I'm going to go next door where I can get both. Not that I'm condoning any of this behavior or whatever, but the fact of the matter is they are legal businesses. And so Chairman Fernandez, I'm sorry, Alex. Chairman Fernandez started this work when we were on the planning. What's that? Your Royal Highness. Started this work when we were on the planning board together, and it was born out of a real desire to tidy things up, and it caused quite a ruckus because it had been done in South Beach and it hadn't been done in North Beach, and so it wasn't equitable because you're tidying things up in South Beach, but you're not tidying things up in North Beach, and then people up in North Beach are like, well, you're destroying our way of life. There was like this whole, there was a lot of drama for a long time about this and the one in South Beach. And so I think that I would almost suggest that we look at it citywide and like not have this discussion yet, but take it into a bigger conversation of not how do we incentivize, but how do we protect the businesses? Because if there's one in North Beach and there's one in South Beach, there might be a handful of others. And so very surgically, carefully protect the businesses that are legal businesses selling legal products. And I'm not talking about the people who are like, wake and bake on Washington Avenue, which is not really what we're trying to encourage. But, and maybe there's nothing we can do, but I think it's worthy of a grown-up, thoughtful conversation about how do we make sure that the businesses who are operating, selling products which are currently still legal, make sure that they are on an equal playing field without undoing the good that these changes in both North and South Beach were designed to implement. And
So I'll just give you some of my thoughts. Clearly we have these establishments already existing in North Beach. And I was speaking with staff, and so like, let's say a Publix wanted to go in, or some other market that happens to sell this as ancillary, they wouldn't be able to. Well, do we want to prohibit that? And while I'm not excited about the tobacco cigarette portion of the establishment, I wouldn't want to get in the way of an establishment like a Publix being able to go into an area. I'm not comfortable saying that this right now should apply citywide. And rather, we've received contact about the business in North Beach that is dealing with this. I'm happy to see how it would work in North Beach. Are there any unintended consequences as a result of this exception? Is there abuse as a result of it? Like, for example, someone could get a license for a convenience store and really not operate as a convenience store at all, just operate completely as a vape shop. Well, we don't want that. Correct. We want to make sure that there is a very, balanced activity there. So I'm willing to see, how it works in North Beach, see are there any unintended consequences before we have a broader discussion. Let me go to the committee member, and then I'll go back to Commissioner Wilson Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, can you I was just out. I don't know if you went over some of the details of this proposal. Can you lay it up for me, please?
Sure. The proposal is, right now, just to give everybody some background, as we stated in the memo, our code does not distinguish between the retail sale of tobacco and vape products either on an incidental or ancillary basis, like you might see in a Publix or a Walgreens, from the true tobacco and vape stores. So they're all treated the same. And currently under our code, we have distance separation requirements citywide. And then in North Beach, there's actually a prohibition on new tobacco and vape dealers through the North Beach commercial character overlay. And this legislation, when it was adopted in 2017, was purposely written very broadly, and we included an intent section that's pertinent, that says it is in the intent of this division to limit access and exposure of tobacco and vaping products to children and adolescents due to their addictive nature and damaging effects on health. It is also the intent of this to limit the proliferation of tobacco, vaping, and smoking device product dealers in areas where the city encourages tourism and to minimize the negative implication that these types of businesses may have. I believe the proposal here is to create some limited relief in North Beach to allow for entities that sell these products on an ancillary or incidental basis, to allow those types of venues or establishments to have the ability to sell these.
Can you give me an example of some relief that would be provided through this?
So if there was consensus among the land use committee members on this, we would have to amend two sections of the code. We'd have to amend the North Beach Commercial Overlay Character District regulations, because right now tobacco and vape dealers are prohibited, and we'd have to modify those regulations to allow for some type of incidental or ancillary use. And then two, we would need to modify 7.5.5.9 regarding the distance separations, and we could make distance separations specific to areas in North Beach, and basically create a distinction between those types of establishments that sold tobacco and vape products on a truly ancillary or incidental basis, and distinguish those from standalone tobacco and vape dealers that sold it as the primary product.
I have an idea. Okay. Through the chair.
All right, are you done?
Yeah. All right. I'd like some follow-up questions, but I can ask you.
All right, Commissioner Bond.
I have an idea. Maybe that addresses some of what's going on. There is a business, and I don't want to call out names because I just did, and I don't want to do that again. But there's a business on Collins that is a food store that sells vape products and arguably more than that. And not a food store like a general grocery store, like a fast food store. So technically it's an ancillary business, but they've no business selling like, if you go into a clothing store, you don't expect to be able to pick up a six-pack. Like, technically, I guess you could, but it doesn't make sense. Is there a way to more narrowly craft this so that if you're already selling alcohol, you can also sell legal tobacco products, but not if you're, but if you're, you know, like selling sporting goods or whatever, you're not. It's not that we're going to open it, because I don't want there to be an unintended consequence of now everybody can sell booze and alcohol if they have a state license to do so, right? We don't want to expand the proliferation. We just want to make sure that the businesses that are already doing business in this general area are able to compete.
Okay, let me just, I have like 5 minutes before 2 minutes actually. Okay, here is what I would say about this. We have some food markets across the city, right? And they're not going to improve their properties because they're going to want to hold on to these licenses. So what are you going to see? They are going to hold on and not do one improvement with the fear that they're not going to be able to continue their business operations, right? So there has to be a way to very narrow tailor it for food markets. And if you're selling alcohol, any kind of alcohol, like beer or wine, I guess that's what you're saying. I suppose if you're a food market and you're selling any kind of beer or wine, then you could you should be able to update your current business. And if the business had the right before, but based on these regulations no longer has that right, somehow to keep that business open. And I don't know how you guys are going to craft this, but it seems like
we do it
you
by a code
understand the problem.
amendment. It's in the code that if you exceed more than 50%, then you lose. Is that correct? You lose your non-conforming use, or if you're closed for 6 months, you lose it, and that is a pure code amendment. Is that correct,
That's
Mr.
correct.
Attorney?
Yes.
That's right.
Okay. I'm not trying to do your job or anything, but.
I think he's
So, yes, okay, Commissioner Suarez, and then let's see if there's a motion on this item.
Okay, so again, this is just for existing businesses?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, are we trying to single out a specific single business in a specific block, or is this going to be all of North Beach? Like, what are we carving out here, Tom?
It would depend upon what the direction of the committee is. The referral was specific to North Beach. If you wanted it to be for all of North Beach, you could give us that direction. If you wanted it to be more narrowly tailored to certain businesses in North Beach, we could come up with some language and bring it back to you.
I will tell you that I will be inclined to see the most narrowly tailored approach possible. Most narrowly tailored approach possible. And I would encourage you to work with a sponsor. This is something that is very narrowly tailored, not for all of North Beach.
And I just want to stay, I am, last I checked, tobacco and vape causes cancer. Okay, and it's going to be a stretch for me to vote on an item that's going to change our code to loosen those restrictions that we've put on for tobacco and vape products. So,
Yeah, but
I'm not a hard no.
Sun causes cancer. The chips you just ate cause. I'm sure has
Not like
chemicals that cause cancer.
Not like
I mean,
tobacco does. I mean, it's proven that it causes cancer. And so, if the sponsor wants my vote on approving this to change our code for a product that is detrimental to someone's health, it's a stretch for me. And I love working with you guys, but there are some things that I'm just not going to agree to. And I don't mind just staying quiet on this, but if I vote it down, please don't hold it against me. I have traumatic experience with cigarette smoke and tobacco, so for me, changing our code for something like that it's a stretch.
And I'll tell you, and as Vice Mayor Bond mentioned, I've sponsored these specific regulations. What I don't want to do is hurt any existing business. I don't want to cause unintended consequences, and that's why, I'm happy for us to explore something that is extremely narrowly tailored, so that we can just, make sure we're not causing unintended consequences.
Through the chair for me.
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to continue this to next month and have the sponsor work with staff and maybe staff work with other folks to try to come up to find a solution that addresses the intent, which is to not punish existing businesses without the unintended consequence of the proliferation of things. I mean, we're trying to become a blue zone city, so I don't really want to have a ton more vape shops either. I don't think that's your goal anyhow. And so I understand what the goal is. I don't want to have all these people all of a sudden selling T-shirts and vapes. That's not what I'm trying to get to. So the question is there, and maybe there isn't a way to do it, and that might be the answer we come to. Is there a way to get to existing businesses who already have, maybe it's people who already have the state license to do it. I don't know enough about this to be able to craft this from the dais. So I would like to propose that we defer this, come back in a month with better information, and figure out if there's something we can do, or if there's nothing we can do, and then proceed accordingly. But we don't have the answers yet.
Okay,
So why vote on it?
All right, so let's bring back the item next month with draft language, narrowly tailored language, and we can take it from there. Yes.
Thank you guys for understanding and supporting, and let's be clear, this is about supporting our small business community. Existing businesses, keeping storefronts in business instead of having vacancies, which lead to public safety issues, and they are unsightly, and they tend to stay vacant for a very long time. So I thank you to Commissioner Fernandez and Bott for understanding, and possibly Commissioner Suarez in the future if he decides to support this, because this is about, we're a community of residents, and also a community of residents who own businesses in our community, and we are not in the business of putting people out of business. And that's what this is about.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilson Gonzalez. We'll continue this item to next month, and we'll have draft language at that time. Let's introduce item number 8.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 8 is discuss the North Beach Water Quality and Park View Canal Report.
All right. Welcome. So, Commissioner Wilson Gonzalez, I'm not sure if you want to stick around, because this is an item I sponsored a number of years ago the original study on water quality for North Beach by Dr. Solo Gabriel. You did the follow-up, you sponsored the follow-up study, and we have our resiliency director today to present on the item. Welcome, Amy.
Great.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, and I actually got the report, and this is fascinating stuff that I think we can apply also to other areas in the city. It's also quite disturbing once you see some of what is happening in our waterways. But thank you for the acknowledgement, and I'm going to chair my AHAC meeting. Okay.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Yes. Commissioner Bott.
Nick, if you would add me as a co-sponsor with with everybody's agreement to that. I would like to say, for everybody listening, this is a hot topic. And I would like to commend my colleagues for having brought these items forward. And I would like to commend the staff who have been working on this, because their predecessors, again, not going to call anybody out, but I called the city. I emailed the city saying, my dudes, what is happening? The citywide water quality advisory has not been lifted for Parkview Island, but it's been cleared for the entire city. And what I kept getting told for months, not a couple days, was, oh, it's just an anomaly. It's fine. You'll be fine. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Stop bugging us. Predecessors, not the folks here in the room, but predecessors said that. That was in March, April, May going on of 2020. And it has taken years of pounding fists on tables, residents getting perhaps overly exercised, commissioners sponsoring activities, funding being secured through the general budget to get to the point where we are. So it is, I can't believe that residents had to basically scream at the city, not you guys, but holler at the city to take seriously the fact that this was not normal. And when residents get together and advocate, they can change the world, or at least change what's happening in their backyard. And it is so important that you guys are presenting this to us, because had residents and commissioners not taken this seriously, and had you guys not taken this seriously, we'd still be sitting there begging people to do the research, to do the work, to understand what's happening, and to start finding solutions. We are not where we need to be yet, but we are so much closer than where we would have been without this. So thank you, and to Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez, and to you guys. And it's great to see you again. Last time I saw you, we were drilling holes in a parking lot. It was permissible. It was permitted. We weren't just randomly drilling holes, but we were getting water sample qualities. So it's great to see you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Bott. And I'll tell you, one of the first things that I did as an elected official was to team up with our environmental and sustainability department, and team up with our city administration, specifically because of the degraded water quality in the Parkview Island Canal. And I remember it was an issue you flagged for me when I was running for office.
Yeah.
I remember sitting on your deck with a group of neighbors, and you educating me on the issue. And it's why, specifically because of you and your neighbors, I felt a great sense of responsibility to bring forward the first study, the funding. We've been prioritizing year after year for relining of the infrastructure and other infrastructure improvements, which, Amy, I believe we've been able, through some of these capital investments we've been doing, temporary investments, quick wins, but we've been able to lower the level of toxins in the water. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And we've been able to take it from one number to one number?
It's a variation, and actually the professor will show that, but she'll show you definitely it was much higher in the past, and now it's not quite where we need to be, but between storm events, it's significantly lower.
Is lowered significantly, with clearly still more work to be done. So with that, I want to recognize you and ask you to introduce your item.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, and for your support of the items, and for also keeping that support in ways that move us forward and keep us motivated, but hold us accountable. Parkview Canal is a very important item for our community, for our city, but also us as staff, as public servants. When I came to this position, the last thing I wanted to do was to have a polluted canal, at my footsteps. And we've worked really hard. The whole staff behind me is part of the team that has worked on this, and they're also here to share and to answer any questions for this area. So we are surrounded by water in Miami Beach. We know that trash, waste, bacteria sources, and anything on the streets and underground ends up in our water ultimately. Biscayne Bay is already an impaired water body. We've gone through fish kills. It's at a tipping point, and particularly in the northern bay, it's lost a huge amount of seagrass, which is where this canal lies within. So it's a very important area. If you take a look at the Miami Waterkeeper swim guide reports, you will see that in Miami-Dade and Broward County, canals have urban stormwater runoff that causes bacterial issues. So this isn't unique, but it's not acceptable for our community. The issues are widespread. Beaches tend to have much more stronger levels of circulation, so the levels are very strict there, and bathing and swimming is allowed. But that level is much more difficult in these canals. But again, that doesn't make it okay. So these canal levels have been high since we started sampling 6 years ago. We don't have results before that. And we actually utilize the Surfrider results as well within our data. Since this has been so persistent, we've had Dr. Helena Solo-Gabriel twice. This is her second study. So she specializes in this field of contamination and intertidal zones. She is an associate dean with the University of Miami College of Engineering. And she's really recognized nationally and internationally for her work. Now, due to the work and all the sanitary sewer improvements, she's going to highlight some of the improvements, and that's good. reconfirmed that stormwater is the biggest issue that we have, washing sediments into the drains and into the canals. As the chair mentioned, we have dedicated more than 8 million over the last few years in projects. Some are done, some are in process, and some are future to really fix this, including a dredging, a flushing analysis, as well as
Amy.
sanitation.
Commissioner
I'm sorry, how many dollars have we allocated?
More than 8 million in the
That's what I
last
thought
few
you said.
years.
In how many years?
In the last few years, a couple years.
2 to
2 to 3 years.
Like
yeah.
3 years.
Yeah. And so we are ready to do more. You know, we're not giving up. So Dr. Sola Gabriel will share her findings and recommendations. There are 10 selected recommendations listed in your memo that she will go over that give us the best chances of restoring this, this water body. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Helena Sola Gabriel.
Welcome, doctor.
Thank you. You can call me Helena. That's fine. Okay. Is the presentation up? Oh, it's now. Great. Okay, I'm going to be describing our work looking at enterococci, and as a reminder, enterococci is a fecal indicator bacteria. It's an indicator of fecal contamination, and it's used to assess the risk of gastrointestinal disease when in contact with water. Specifically, I'm going to talk about enterococci in groundwater and stormwater at the Parkview Canal. This is a joint project led by University of Miami with collaboration from NOAA. And again, I'd like to thank the Commission and City of Miami Beach for everything that was done and also all the support that was provided. Wanted to emphasize that when you measure FIB or enterococci, there's two main measurement methods. One is by culture or growth. If it grows, it means it's viable, capable of causing infection. And the culture method is required for state monitoring. And the way we measure growth is we collect a water sample, we put it into a tray, which separates it into wells. And then when the bacteria grow, they release fluorescence, and we count the number of wells, and that gives us a unit called most probable number. The other method of analysis is a genomic analysis based on measuring the DNA. Now, the DNA is not dead or alive. You don't know. You just know that the organism was there. And the nice thing about the genetic analysis is that it not only tells enterococci that we measure by Entero-1A. When we measure it by DNA, we call it Entero-1A. But it also gives us information about dog presence, human presence, and birds. The units of measure are genomic copies, GC. And again, it tells us whether or not there were dogs contributing, humans, birds, and we also measured for seagulls specifically, both general birds and seagulls. The regulatory guidelines for enterococci, yeah?
I'm sorry, just a quick question. When we talked about the fact that there are iguanas everywhere pooping. So we didn't, and in Parkview specifically, we have families of raccoons. We don't keep them there, but they live there in the mangroves. But we have a ton of iguanas, so that wasn't measured as well through the DNA?
They don't have markers for raccoons yet, or iguanas.
Or iguanas, okay.
Yes, but they would also contribute to the enterococci.
Okay.
Okay, in terms of the regulations, there's a whole slew of different guideline levels. The guidelines set by the Florida Department of Health for bathing in beaches, it's not designated for canals specifically, but for going into a beach is 70 mpm per 100 mils. Then there's another guideline that's been issued by the US EPA, which is for kayaking in calm waters of 371. And then there's a research-focused guideline based on the microbial source tracking markers, which for humans, for swimming purposes, they recommend no higher than 525 genomic copies per 100 mils, and for birds, no more than 200,000. Now, the PBC is unique in the sense that, as Amy mentioned, on the ocean side, we have a lot of dilution, and beaches on the ocean side tend to have better water quality than beaches on the bay side. The PBC is located on the bay side, and not only is it in the bay side, it's a canal within a canal. So it has very restricted water flow. There's very limited dilution. In addition to that, it drains a large area of over 80 acres. 3/4 of that area comes from east of the island, and about 1/4 is from the island itself. And then to further complicate things, the stormwater infrastructure was installed back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s before there were regulations for the first flush treatment of the water that comes through in the stormwater, so now there is no treatment because of the time frame of when the stormwater system was installed. There's no treatment for that stormwater that comes from the streets and enters into the PBC.
So just to confirm, the pipes here I know have been lined, but there is, Jay, this might be putting you on the pop quiz seat. The pipes have been lined and that's been useful, and that happened very quickly because I was still living there when that happened, so that was great. But at the outfalls, there's no water cleaning system, is that right? And the pipes themselves, unless there's been a rupture, they have not been replaced since they were built in '56.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you're referring to the stormwater? When you say
Any of the pipes on Parkview?
Well, with the stormwater, we have a project underway to install filtration systems?
Yeah, but I'm talking about
and
the actual
stormwater treatment?
But the actual pipes.
There are two kinds of pipes. We have sanitary sewer
Right.
pipes that are lined, but then the stormwater pipes are different, and those have not been lined, as far as I understand.
And on the sanitary sewer, we've already invested on lining, and we have, I believe, $2.5 million allocated for phase two.
And actually, I think that's been about 90% complete and invoiced.
Okay,
And the engineering team can speak to that.
yes.
Hi, my name is Patricia Rendon. I'm the Regulatory Compliance Manager for the city, and I oversee all the trenchless sewer, trenchless rehabilitation. We have, Public Works have prioritized all trenchless rehabilitation in North Beach, specifically starting in the Parkview area because of the water quality issues. We've lined the sewer 95% and rehabilitated all of the manholes, and then we proceeded to line about, I would say, 95 to 98% of the sewer that we call the Parkview Extended Area, which is 73 to 76, from Parkview Island all the way to the ocean. That is the area that's tributary to, that would have any cross connection with the storm, that would have any contamination flow. So that is completely lined. Also, all the manholes have been rehabilitated, the ones that needed rehabilitation.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I should have asked this in the briefing, but it didn't occur to me, and I know I grilled you on lots of questions, but if we've lined the sewers and that has helped, we haven't lined the stormwater drains, right? So there are two possible issues. One is just where the water that's in the stormwater drains comes out. That's a huge problem, but is there also an issue of leaching through the pipes that were laid in 1956?
They just protect.
What's that?
Wasn't that just what they
Okay,
lined?
my thought is
The
that
lining was for sewer.
you,
Sanitary
yeah, the
sewer.
storm sewer pipes, sometimes they're not lined intentionally because you want that water to flow into the ground, and that provides a little bit of treatment.
Just
So
remember
those are
with those-
typically not as critical, and the groundwater usually is, what we've been finding in the studies, cleaner, is relatively clean compared
And
to all
so
the other
even
water.
though this huge area, and for people watching at home, it was the slide with the light blue square around, I don't know if we can
It's like a
put that.
rectangle.
Yeah, if we can put that slide back up, just so people understand. So it's that light blue rectangle to the east of Parkview Island, which is very densely populated, including a school full of kids going to the bathroom all day long.
But I think that's part of what the doctor's gonna get to.
No, I understand that, but so all of that stuff is coming through into Parkview, where you've got the island at the canal at right angles, basically. So wouldn't stormwater help, lining the stormwater canals help, I'm sorry, the stormwater pipes help a little bit?
You need drainage from what I gather, you need drainage on the storm water because not all the water in the storm drainage
Right, we
makes
need
its
to get
way
this-
out, so you need it to drain, otherwise it's gonna populate nutrients when it stays stagnant in there, I would imagine.
Yeah, so again, there's two kinds of pipes. There's the sanitary sewer that comes from inside of a building that has human waste in it.
Right.
Those are the pipes that have to be lined, because if they contaminate the groundwater or the stormwater, it's a major issue.
Right.
Whereas the stormwater, the thought process is that it's not as bad as the house, the waste from the house.
But we've
inside
just
the
talked
house.
about how there are birds and homeless folks and dogs and raccoons and iguanas. who are not using indoor plumbing.
Right.
And so the question is, how much worse is sewer line water than stormwater water?
Let's do something. I want to allow the doctor to finish the presentation. Let's keep a note of our questions. Because I think, you know, the doctor's going to go through a lot of data which we've seen in our briefings. But I want the public to be able to stay on point with this as well. Because we owe it to them for purposes of transparency to be able to go through the presentation. So, okay, let's just allow Dr. Solo.
And I'd like to get back to that.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, so we started going over the data that's been collected, and we separated the data into the red, which means above 70, and the green, which is below 70. And as mentioned, as Amy mentioned, the data was collected starting in 2019. It was initiated because there was a water quality study of Miami Beach at that time. The sewage spill, the big one, was in 2020. And then the water quality kept being elevated above the 70, and therefore monitoring continued, and it just didn't go down. And in 2022, University of Miami was contracted to look at this in more detail. And during that time, as we were collecting the data, the information, City of Miami Beach was very proactive in mitigating and in improving and in cleaning through as best as possible through short-term measures the area. And so by 2022, there was an enhancement of the mitigation process. Prior to the mitigation, 92% of the samples exceeded the 70, and after, 70% exceeded. This difference is significant, is statistically significant, so there has been an improvement overall, but it's still high. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done because there's still a lot of red. Another aspect that we've been looking at is the kayaking standard. So just out of curiosity, what would it look like if the focus was on the kayaking standard of 370, which is given by the yellow, and we now have the number that would still remain red above the kayaking standard, and prior to the intense mitigation measures of 2022, 56 exceeded that guideline level, whereas 20% are now exceeding after the fact. 20% is still a lot, it's still high, but at least it's closer to possibly opening it for partial use, which could be kayaking. Another very significant aspect that we saw between 2022 and 2024 is the thin lines here correspond to 2022, the thick lines correspond to 2024. The blue is the tide, the elevation, so we see low tide coming through, and the black corresponds to enterococci, and this is between storm events. And what we saw between the storm events is a very significant decrease in the enterococci levels from thousands, so we have a log scale, thousands of mpm per 100 mils down to tens and even below the 70 guideline level. So that's a very important improvement because before it looked like there was a groundwater source coming in which was indicative of sewage, and we lost that source, which is good. So we no longer see a groundwater source, so it appears as though the mitigation measures to the sanitary sewer, the improvements to the air release valves, and also the pipelining has made an impact.
And that's the slide where I was asking you, Amy. Yeah. So let's say pre the sewer upgrades that we've been doing. What was the level we were at? I mean, we're looking there at almost
thousands.
Yeah,
like 1,200, and then it dropped, to hundreds down to even below 70.
Below 70. So we've gone from thousands to below 70. It's still not right. It's still not where we need to be. But I want to highlight to the members of the public that are watching.
But this is only during storm?
Between storms at low tide.
And that's
And at low tide is when
critical.
The water in the canal is real low, so we're getting groundwater coming in. So it shows us that the groundwater is no longer contaminating, serving as a source of contamination.
And so to the public that's been asking us to do work, year after year, we've been prioritizing funding. And thank you, Amy, for guiding us on this. But we've been prioritizing funding for these sewer improvements. And this is showing us we're still not where we need to be. We still have a lot of work to improve on, especially when it comes to, you know, street cleaning and a lot of different things. But when it comes to the sanitary sewer improvements, the numbers are showing that our investment is yielding a positive improvement to the water quality.
I agree, and I think this is a very significant improvement.
Thank you.
Well, at the least, it's moving in the correct direction. Like, you know, is it significant enough? We could have that debate all day long, but if it were going in the other direction, we would know we weren't even close to being on the right track.
From 1,200 to 70, it's significant, but it's not enough. Yeah,
No,
we
I
gotta-
would think it's.
Yeah, but a groundwater source is really concerning because it usually indicates sewage, sanitary sewage. And the fact that we no longer have that, even though our numbers are high, at least it's not sanitary sewage.
Commissioner Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the fact that we lined our pipes, it's helping us. So would you, so it is coming from our sewage pipes. So what?
That's only
Back in
one source.
2022, there was some evidence that groundwater was contaminated. There was some evidence that there was some groundwater contamination. We didn't know where it was coming from. We didn't, because what we were looking at was a mixture of groundwater and stormwater. But at that time, because of the way, the timing of the elevated levels, you know, at low tide, we were seeing higher levels of bacteria. It indicated that the groundwater was contributing. We didn't know if it was sewage or not at that time, but now we don't see it, so, which is really good.
What does this graph show? You know, factually, if you could give me in like one sentence, what does this prove as far as our infrastructure?
It indicates that groundwater is no longer a source during low tide, which supports no sewage contamination.
That the pipelining has had a positive impact.
And Commissioner, I think that's very relevant because this whole study and the issues with this canal, it's a study in non-point source pollution. We're trying to go to the biggest sources first and rule them out. So you always think it's going to be the sanitary sewer. So it's kind of like getting to, now what else is it? What's the next source?
Yeah, I'm just concerned about all the other pipes in Miami Beach where they're not lined.
Yeah.
And, you know, you see it in Parkview Island because it's such a small, narrow strip of water, but when you go to West Avenue, you don't have that. I mean, obviously it's in a flush zone, but to think that our pipes are so old that we're contaminating the water, possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real concern. I mean, how much of Miami Beach has been lined?
Well, it's an engineering
I'd like to-
question.
I'd like to
Patricia, do you
have-
know that off the top of your head?
Through the chair, I'd like to-
It's hard to say. We've been trying to see what has been lined prior to our time, and trying to get those records has been hard, and we've constantly working on validating the work or the information that we have prior to us. But trenchless rehabilitation is lining of sewers has happened since the 90s, and the city has been doing trenchless rehabilitation in the sewer for mostly for I&I issues as part of the code with the part of the county
Mostly
code.
for what kind of issues?
I&I inflow and infiltration, reducing inflow through cracks or through manholes and infiltration through the pipes. That's I&I, inflow and infiltration. So mostly lining of pipe is done for that reason, for I&I, to stop inflow and infiltration of groundwater and rainwater into the stormwater, into the sewers.
I guess my concern is that notwithstanding the fact that the pipelining has had positive impact in this area of the city where we needed it, and clearly we have recurring water quality problems, not to the severity that we see at Parkview Island and the canal there, but we do have from time to time water quality issues in other parts of the city. It's certainly something that we should be seeing, and perhaps we should, this committee could ask the administration to provide us with a report of those areas of the city that have already had pipelining areas that, you know, that might be lower in the priority list for sanitary sewer improvements that perhaps we could expedite in the meantime lining in our effort to improve overall water quality, and we could make a motion to request a report like that to come at a future date to this committee.
Through the chair.
Yes.
This is literally why we need to have the discussion about raising our sewer rates. And for us to not want to have that conversation or not want to make the hard decisions for projects that are 60 and 90% designed already, for projects where costs are going up by the day, literally, given the last couple of weeks of economic data. It is, to me, sort of shocking that, well, this is why we need to have the conversation on Wednesday to move forward with the responsible management of our infrastructure.
Yeah, that's not the item before us today.
I understand that,
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to recognize the doctor to continue, and also say we talk about workforce housing, and we need to make sure that we have the proper processes in place before we adopt anything that could affect our low-income and fixed-income individuals. Further strengthen them, we need to make sure that we protect those individuals so that we don't kick out of our city inadvertently the very same people who we're trying to protect through our policies, while we're creating tax exceptions for big developers who have abandoned their properties so they can preserve their properties. It's not about, it's not about just getting it done. It's about getting it done without hurting people in our community who have been part of the fabric of Miami Beach and who we need to protect as their elected officials. So it's all a balance. I don't disagree with you, but we need to protect those who who don't have a bigger voice. Doctor, please continue.
Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so now in the 2022 study, we identified that the highest levels of enterococci were within the stormwater conveyance system. So that green line is the stormwater conveyance system, an example. And if you look at the plans, take a cross-section view, so you cut into the ground and you look at it from the side. This is an image of what the storm system looks like. The PVC crosses into the storm system, and so in the storm system, there's a mixture of PVC water and groundwater, and when it rains, there's storm water that comes in. And so in the storm system, which is where we were sampling during 2022, it was a big mix of stormwater, groundwater, and PVC water. And so in our 2024 study, what we wanted to do, we focused, is to separate the water sources. We separately sampled the groundwater from the stormwater to better understand where the enterococci was coming from, and we also added in the microbial source tracking. So we collected separate samples of stormwater, groundwater, and PVC water at different depths. We separated those samples into 3 splits, one for enterococci by culture, another for the DNA analysis, and the last one for water quality. This is just images of the different sampling methods. The groundwater, as Commissioner Bott mentioned, was through drilling into the ground where we were able to extract groundwater. Stormwater, you can see there where the grate was removed, and then at the water surface, there was a person physically there during the rain and was able to collect the water before it fell into the storm conveyance system, and of course, the water from the PVC. These are the results from the groundwater. The groundwater, if you look at it, a large portion of it is very high quality, less than 10, but there are places where we have hot spots. The major hot spot is up by the Biscayne Beach Elementary School, 24,000, over 24,000, which then caused us to look in that area a little bit more specifically, and then there was other areas that were elevated in the hundreds along the 73rd Street corridor. But if you look at the stormwater, so here the big one was 24,000, just one, but if you look at stormwater on the other hand, the levels are orders of magnitude higher. We had to change our dilutions, and the numbers went up to 240,000, even above 240,000. And there were no samples that were less than 1,000. So the stormwater, the water that's on the streets, is what is really contributing high levels of enterococci to the PVC.
And that's what's bringing in bacteria, like from pet waste, from litter,
Everything that falls in the street,
sediments.
yes. Yes.
And not to jump the ship, but what was the DNA result? Like, what was it mostly?
It has everything in it.
Is there was there any one more than the other?
Interestingly, it was birds are everywhere, and then PVC. The birds were just one of those markers that were just predominant, and it's everywhere. So, but we also see human, and we also see dog.
Or like magnitude-wise, how much more bird poop was there than human and dog poop?
It's hard to tell. All we can say is that every sample showed evidence of bird. So, the bacteria, we can say that it was there present. So to do it quantitatively, to say birds are more than humans, that are more than dogs, is difficult. I think it's better to look at those risk-based levels.
That's because birds are everywhere, obviously, right?
Yeah, but but to look at the levels of the marker, there's a risk level for humans of 525, and then the birds, it's okay to get up to 200,000. So we can look at those levels to see if there's a risk from the microbial source tracking markers. But if I can,
sure, I'm sorry.
Can I continue? Okay, thank you. But what this shows is that we haven't gotten to microbial source tracking yet on this slide. We're just looking at the bacteria, the enterococci, and the levels are really high throughout the watershed. And this is at the street surface. And then within the canal at the kayak launch, we see 9,000, hundreds, but at the outfall, at the Biscayne Beach Elementary outfall, we're seeing about close to 200,000, which is really high for a water body of a canal. Here, just to emphasize the differences in the bacteria, the total bacteria level, groundwater, again, this is a log scale. The groundwater in green is lower than the stormwater, which is blue. The kayak launch and the Biscayne Beach Elementary are in between, with the Biscayne Beach Elementary higher than what we're seeing at the kayak launch. Are the numbers that we're seeing out of the norm? In terms of the PVC, we are within what the literature shows would be considered typical within highly urban areas, and usually the literature emphasizes more contaminated sites, so we are consistent with other cities in the United States. Now, with the microbial source tracking.
Can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
We're double Houston and Raleigh. How's that?
We're on, when I look at the bacteria level, I think of like order of magnitude.
Exactly.
So 50, if it's like 200,000, then I would say yes, we have an issue. But if it's in the same order of magnitude, so if I multiply by 10 or divide by 10, the numbers are consistent.
Doctor, one more thing. If you could remind everyone, what is PVC water exactly?
Parkview Canal?
Oh, no, but so that's just the water that's there?
Yeah, so yes, the water that we collect. Those are the level, the median levels.
But if you go back to the other slide where you have those two big orange circles, that's because are you collecting anywhere else besides those locations?
In the PVC, in this study, we collected only at these locations.
Okay.
In 2022, we went all the way around, a couple of times. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to continue on. To get to the microbial source tracking, these are the results for the canal. And the green corresponds to the enterococci by both culture and by DNA method. And you'll notice that there's a lot of pink, which is the bird. And the level of pink is very high, upwards of 200,000, which tells us that the levels of bird marker in the canal are excessive. And just from the bird marker alone, we would not recommend swimming in the canal. But we also see from the gray and also the aqua blue, we see impacts from both humans and dogs. but the birds are predominant, and they're very high levels within the canal.
I would like to just, we're gonna try and get through this, but just so I can understand. If it were, so the birds just, they exist, they are an urban thing. No one's gonna take out BB guns and start shooting the birds, that's not a thing that's gonna happen. But if it were just the birds, and we didn't have, the fact that you've got this entire, I forget the term used, but this entire rectangular area that was draining into Parkview Canal, and Parkview has these right angles, and we've got the school, which is a hot spot. If it were just the birds, it'd be high, and, you take your chances, but that's normal, and it's not great, but that is what it is. It's the birds that are compounded by all these other exacerbating factors that is pushing us over the brink.
But by how much?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Was it birds with the stormwater, with the pet waste, with the homeless?
But the birds would be like this benchmark, like not a benchmark, this baseline. And it's all these other things that are incremental that are.
Yeah, when you have a combination of birds with humans, the risks are higher.
And the humans are coming because are you talking about birds interacting with humans swimming in it, or bird poop plus human poop?
Human poop, dog poop, and bird poop.
Okay, and so the human poop is because it's not the sewer lines anymore because we fixed that. So.
Well, the public, but we don't have control over the portion that is from the person's home to the public right-of-ways and the school.
And the school is a hot spot, and so do we have any sense of whether it's coming from homes that aren't properly fixed, or?
It's coming from the streets.
Yeah, but she just showed a slide that it's everywhere.
It's coming from the streets. The human source and the dog source is coming from the streets.
So human poop coming from the streets comes from?
People who don't have sanitation.
Okay. And we know that there is a homeless encampment up in that neighborhood because we've cleaned it out a bunch of times. And there are people living under bridges who are trying to do the right thing by not pooping on the lawn.
And this is where, sometimes we have to have a conversation. It's not, we try to be very proactive on how we handle homeless issues, but, sometimes we just need to have a bathroom open, to prevent people from doing basic life necessities on the streets, in mangroves, on outfalls, where we don't want them to be doing it. Doctor, if you can continue. Sorry.
So coming back to the microbial source tracking, what we're finding in the canal is all three sources. A lot of bird, and then dog and humans. This is the groundwater data. What's interesting about the groundwater data is that we do see bird there, but lower levels of bird. And I believe this is contamination from the stormwater. So the stormwater has high levels of bird, and so does the PVC water. And I believe all of that is mixing underground and influencing, and that's why we see bird marker in the groundwater. But if we look at any other sources, we did not see any dog marker. There was one site that showed some indication of human marker, but the human marker was below that 525 the threshold for 525. So the groundwater just had one small detect on the humans, and so those are the results there. And then when it comes to the stormwater, again, we're seeing a lot of pink. The stormwater shows, this is the street surface water, shows bird contamination. We see dog, and we see human. We see the gray bars, and we see the aqua bars throughout the stormwater as well. And the levels of enterococci in the stormwater are very high. Looking at the microbial source tracking in more of a spatial way, again, you see the pink, which is the birds throughout the watershed, but you also see some of the aqua. And if we highlight the aqua, we can see perhaps that maybe it's around the parks, maybe, that's the human source. It may be associated with the parks.
Can you go back to that slide for a second, please? Thanks.
And there's some remnants of dog source in other places, but.
Can I just say that drawing looks like a bird? Just,
Okay.
I had to.
A flamingo, maybe.
A flamingo, there you go. Yes, that's good, doctor. Yes. All right.
Is that where the homeless encampment is? Where that blue?
No, that's why I'm looking at it.
Also, another aspect that may be attracting birds, I just want to mention, it may be worth looking at the birds a little more carefully, but there are some people who have animal feeding stations.
Yeah.
And they are still, and they feed the birds intentionally.
Cat feeding.
So, yeah, it's just some, I think it's, yeah, it's.
So, okay,
happens
so
a
I
lot.
know Parkview Island better than I should. So, I can't see what, the one that's like at the head of the bird, all the way at the left.
Okay, this.
Or like a tail.
Yeah.
That's more like the tail, but yeah. But that's
Okay.
that's human. That is
That is a building that has deficient pipes, because that is a park.
But this is coming out from the street surface. It has not gone down yet. So this is water that we're collecting from the street surface.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Stormwater.
it's stormwater.
That's not in the pipes yet.
Yeah, the S means stormwater, so yeah.
By the way,
So, okay, because that park is used by kids and dogs all the time, so I'm curious, maybe folks who are camping out come there at night, but I've never, I mean, I lived there for 6 years and I never saw homeless people on Parkview Island. I did see them on the bridges connecting the island to Crab Alley, and there's a big, not a big,
there's
but
an issue there.
but there's an encampment near where the dog park is, just south of the water towers. There, like where that's fenced off, there are people who live back there on and off. We've cleared that out a few times. But then you look at the one that's like right in the middle. I'm sure there's a number or a letter to it. That like a wing. There's one that's half pink and one that's half blue.
Oh, yes, I see that.
Where is that?
S means stormwater. That's on, let's see, Carlisle and
But
73rd.
those are all buildings. Like, are people just squatting between cars and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night?
I don't know.
Yeah, what is the source? Like, how is that, elevated level making its way there ultimately? That's.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Like, I would have expected to have seen those half blue or quarter blue, where folks are sleeping and camping under bridges, whatever.
But could that be a sign of broken pipes
That's-
somewhere?
It's on the street, so
on
it
the
has,
street.
it's on the street.
I have a question through the chair.
Yes.
And I don't want to piss off the cat people, but there are also a lot of cats there. Have you checked for cats? Cat poop?
We did not check for cats. There is a cat marker though. Cats can be identified.
So,
Why
but the
wouldn't
numbers would be
we-
even higher if you were checking for cats.
We may have more pie, more pieces to the pie.
The numbers wouldn't be more, but.
The entire,
but,
co- yeah, the
but the
entire cocktail
numbers
is-
might be different.
The pies may look a little different.
And is there a way to still use the data that you have to see if there's cat poop there?
Did I have to retest it?
Or you have to?
Yeah, I
do
mean,
the
my
study?
sense is if there's dog, there's cat, I mean.
Yeah, but what percentage? I mean, because that's, we're trying to identify the source. We know that we have a cat population
It's just
issue.
growing.
And that's growing, and so, why
think
why wouldn't we have tested for the cats? Just wondering.
Because it's expensive to analyze and it's very, it's time, it costs more money to do some additional markers.
Okay. What other markers didn't we consider? Just.
I don't think there's much, there's cows and pig, but that's not applicable
We'd
to here,
noticed
so
those if
yes.
they were
But I
roaming
don't
the
think there,
streets.
I think cat is the only other applicable one that
And how many
exists.
times did you sample at these locations?
Some locations were 8 or 9 times
8 or 9 times over a course of how long?
of a storm. We were
Only
out
over
during the
storm.
summer. Yeah, we were out during the summer, from maybe 3 to 4 months.
And in between the periods of storms, so like for example, if there's a storm A, it flushes out all the crap on the floor. Did you wait a day, a week, 2 weeks to the next storm, or what was
Whenever we could get rain, it's not easy to get storms, because predictions were,
It's
so
almost
whenever
every
we were
day.
able to get a rain, there were a lot of mist. We thought we were gonna get rain, we were there, and it didn't happen. So it was some trial and error, but we tried to get every storm we possibly could.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just crazy to me that there's
So
much
let's allow the doctor to go to her next
conclusion,
slide.
right? Sorry.
Yes, here.
Okay, so, yes, so on the stormwater, the sources are bird, human, and dog. So again, we conclude that the enterococci were lower between storm events, especially at low tide. We lost our groundwater contamination signal, which suggests that the sanitary sewer pipelining and repair of the air release valves has improved water quality. We believe that the main source, or the main water type contributing enterococci to the PVC is stormwater. And the source to the stormwater comes from birds, humans, and dogs at street level. In the PVC, there's an additional load from birds, more so than what we see in the stormwater. And we also note that the Biscayne Beach Elementary outfall also contributes enterococci to the PVC. Our recommendations are here. I wasn't planning on going into details of the recommendation, but there's a lot of bullet points for stormwater, including addressing outfalls and increased street sweeping, especially on the east side of the catchment. And hopefully with increased mitigation, short-term measures, we can address the stormwater contamination. Groundwater, I believe that a lot of the groundwater may be due to contamination from surface water, so that would help with the groundwater. But regardless, there needs to be a continued inspection and maintenance of the sanitary sewer system, and hopefully those hot spots will be taken care of. And then the PVC itself, we recommend improving the flushing of the PVC through a dredging and flush program, and then also improve the water quality from stormwater outfalls, improve the shoreline, and then also consider maybe as a step to increasing use of that waterway by thinking about the kayaking guidelines.
All right.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and thank you for this opportunity. It's been a great opportunity for myself, for my students, and for all the researchers involved. We really
I'm guessing
appreciate
we're not done with you guys yet.
We are not done, and thank you so much for your work with the first study, with the second study, with these findings and recommendations you've brought forward to us is very enlightening. I just on the issue of the source, going back whether birds or human or dogs, again, this is all based on DNA.
Yes.
And so, bird DNA is bird DNA.
Yes.
Bird DNA wouldn't be cat DNA.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So,
There's no way to mess that. There's no way to.
It's like 99%. I mean, there's always a small risk of measuring bird, and it was really something else. But it's like 90. These markers have been tested for extensively.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just, inquiring about that. So, we've done a lot. I mean, I think that's a clear thing. There's been significant improvements with the efforts that our public works staff has done, with the professional guidance of our chief resiliency officer and you, doctor. The guidance has been significant, and the improvement is clearly evident in the study results. What are the most pressing things that we can do over the next 6 months? That we were to say, we are going to prioritize resources to bring this water quality level, the same way we got it from 1,200 to 70, now drop it even further. What are the key things we need to prioritize over the next 6 months to achieve the intended outcomes?
There's a whole list of recommendations there, and I believe that it's going to take a lot of those recommendations in order to bring it down to the 70 focus area. There's some short-term recommendations, like the street sweeping. I know it's very intense on the island, but I don't believe it's as intense on the east side, which represents 3/4 of the catchment. So maybe increasing the street sweeping on the east side could help. In addition, the street sweepers tend to be these big machines, but I do believe that there may be some value to also having more detailed cleaning, where you have people with actual pooper scoopers that can actually pick up the waste from grassy areas, maybe even sweeping the curbs with more detail, because those big machines, they're good for cleaning, but bulk cleaning, but we
I've
need
never
some.
been impressed with the big machines, honestly.
Yeah, same.
I honestly would sell those machines because I honestly don't think that they make, let me just.
Well, not only that,
Yeah.
but what are they, those machines aren't picking up bird poop. Right?
They're cleaning up the street, which is where all the contamination is. So by removing some of that debris that's from the street, they're removing some of the bacteria.
What else? So, street sweeping, more detailed cleaning, what else would you say?
Analysis of the I mean, we looked at the big outfalls. I recommend looking at some of the private outfalls as well in documenting what's coming in from the
Have we
smaller private
communicated
outfalls.
with Miami-Dade County Public Schools and informed them of the elevated level of issues we have coming from their property?
Yes, we have, Mr. Chair. So we have been on site. We have walked their whole system with them and sort of pointed out different areas that could be, systems that have to be maintained. We sent a formal letter to the superintendent of schools asking them to, address the problem and that we would collaborate and support them. And we've had a lot of back and forth trying to assist them in evaluating their system.
Has any action been taken by the school board regarding it?
It's a very old system, and they've had a big transition in staff, is kind of what they told us. I believe they did a little bit of work in looking at their manholes. Patricia, they've done some. Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Wong.
Okay, so before I get into the school thing, because I've got I feel like I'm in Congress, I have whiteboards and things. The bird pooping elevated specifically on Parkview Island, like going back to those, remember that it's not just sparrows and seagulls, but one of the beauties of Parkview Island is that it's a mangrove. And so you don't hear cars there most of the time, and you see all these gorgeous birds that I don't know the names of, but the ones with the crazy long legs and the long bills and the herons and the great herons and there's like all kinds of birds that, those birds can poop in the water or on the street. Those birds it's amazing that we see them making nests in the mangrove there. It is a gift. So poop away, birds, go nuts. What I'm not okay with is the fact that, and I'm going to try to be diplomatic about this, that the school board has a very large piece of property there that is very intensively used by a lot of people every day. And anybody who spent any time with kids knows that those small children, of whom I had two, go to the bathroom all the time. And they have failing infrastructure as well. And we know this, and they know this. And their response to us is, we're doing the best we can, sorry, basically. And I know that they are tasked with many, many, many things. But being good stewards of their property, and it is their property, within our city that affects our residents is also one of the things that they must be held accountable for. And it doesn't seem like we have much leverage. However, they just are interested in building out a partnership with us to use this site that is part of the Biscayne Bay Elementary footprint and make it into a more community accessible and usable footprint with playing fields and a playground and courts, all kinds of stuff that is amazing. And guess where this is? This is exactly where we need to get access to do the work that we need to do. And so hang on a second, they're asking us for financial support. They're asking for us to partner with them on doing this. And I say, absolutely, we would be happy to do that with you. And part of what we are going to do is go there all at once and fix what needs fixing. Because in addition to what it's doing to our water quality and our neighborhood, do we really want kids playing on a field that is contaminated with poop? I don't think so. So let's do this all together at once with the school board. I'll be reaching out to Joe Geller, our new school board rep, and suggesting that we collaborate as partners and neighbors, trying to do the right thing for our teachers, our kids, our neighbors, in one fell swoop.
I would love to go into the storm system that they have, just to trace it back up, if
Well,
we can.
that would be part of what we're doing. Like, let's make sure This is, but, I mean, I go back to that chart with that ginormous blue dot on the school site. I mean, if we just mitigate that alone, especially due to its proximity, because that's not getting filtered out by being washed down on the roads. It's not getting filtered out by being swept up. It is going into the canal, which is adjacent to it. The only thing separating the school lot from the canal is Crab Alley, which is in no great shakes itself, but I know Commissioner Dominguez has brought an item last year, and we're working on it to beautify that, which is great. Any infrastructure we can improve, and that is, this is all part and parcel, but, so I would like to, I know there are a lot of things we need to do, but I would like to, since they're asking us for help, really jump on that with the support of the administration, Assistant City Manager Martinez and our general manager and our attorneys and you guys say, we have a unique opportunity to do something significant here.
So let me just follow up on that, because I think that's important. We need the school board to buy in on that, and I fully support you in any effort you want to bring forward to address that. And that, I see that as a long-term project, because, we got to get them on board. We got to.
They're asking for money today.
Yep. But in the short term, the sanitary sewer system, cleaning out the sanitary sewer system. Do we need to clean out our sanitary sewer system more frequently?
You mean the storm
Storm
conveyor.
I'm sorry,
Storm
yes.
conveyor.
Thank you.
It would be good to maybe have a program in place where maybe once every 2 weeks, the manholes are pulled, and if anything's found inside, to take a look and see
And
what's
what's
in
our
there.
current, Jay, how often does that get cleaned out currently? What's normal?
Commissioner, my understanding is that the stormwater system in general gets cleaned out once a year. In conversations with operations today, we talked about looking at cleaning the catch basins more frequently, doubling up on the timing of that, 2-3 times every 6 months. In addition, looking at the outfalls. At the outfall, there are some structures there, and looking at addressing those on a monthly basis, looking at cleaning those out.
Okay, how about the recommendation from the doctor about the manholes? Going in once every 2 weeks, and look at how often are we going to those manholes and cleaning those?
So
Catch basin, yeah.
Oh, the catch basin, okay, that's the
so
same, it's
that,
anonymous.
in essence, you have catch basins that are on the side of the streets, those are the sumps. That's where you're probably gonna get your best bang for your buck by cleaning those out, because anything that comes off is gonna be left in those catch basins.
All right, so what is the frequency that you're saying that you're proposing for the catch basins?
3 times over the next 6 months.
3 times a week?
3 times over the next 6 months. So it's every other month we'll be out cleaning them out. Right now, they only get cleaned once a year, and that's citywide.
So,
Let me recognize Commissioner Suarez.
Thank you. I don't see how cleaning the catch basins out is gonna stop bird poop when it storms, and all the bird poop collects, and then it goes to the water.
But it has a solid waste, like, cups and
But
styrofoam,
I
all
think,
of that needs to.
would you say that the real catch-all solution would be an injection well at those outfalls? Like, what would be the most solution-oriented problem for Parkview Island, besides doing these
Yeah,
auxiliary?
there are some designs that the city engineer, I believe, has put together for treating the storm sewage, which includes a sedimentation system followed by other treatment processes that then go to the PVC. I remember Christina Ortega would describe those.
And that's funded.
If I may?
Sure.
In response. So, yes, the Public Works has a design for the outfalls, and it's about a $2.2 million project. It's a treatment system, as was suggested. It's a hydrodynamic separator, so it basically separates anything that's left in there before that water is discharged. Right now, it's in a permitting phase. It's probably going to take another 3 to 6 months to permit, and then we go to construction, hopefully to be completed late in 2026.
And this is for all the outfalls too?
This is for, I believe, there's 2 outfalls that are entering into the PVC. So those are your 2 major outfalls that are in there. There's other projects that are up there are associated with, increasing the whole stormwater system up there associated with the Town Center North Shore D project. And that's going to be a whole other project with other stormwater systems throughout the city. And all those are aimed at exactly what you're talking about. How do we clean up the discharge? How do we clean up that outfall before it goes out the pipe?
And just thinking outside the box, because we're going to be 6-month permitting, is there a solution that you can drip feed into the stormwater system to remove the bacteria before it goes into the water? Besides, it's almost like, you have a fish tank, you dechlorinate the water and then you put the fish in.
But adding chemicals will impact the ecosystem, but UV disinfection may be good because it does not keep it's not a chemical that's added, it's like radiation right there as it's going through. But the water has to be very clear.
We chemically treat all the sewage water at the plant, right? And then it goes into the ocean. So, I mean, what I'm saying is there a chemical treatment that we can have temporarily, maybe even just to test it for a week to see if it removes all the bacteria from the outfalls?
In traditional wastewater treatment, here we use chlorine, but I don't know, I mean, in the wastewater treatment plant, it's treated at the wastewater treatment plant, then goes to an ocean outfall, which is miles offshore, and then there's a lot of mixing. Yeah, it's as opposed to having it right here and, right next to where it's being discharged, the people be right there. You don't have as much dilution, so
the end all be all would be a injection well or a separation system that's at the last step of this stormwater.
But they're working on that already.
Yeah,
correct.
But that's still permitting. That's still going to need construction for Parkview and Town Center.
If I may.
Yes,
Mr. Chairman. So in a wastewater treatment plant, yes, you add chemicals, you chlorinate, but prior to discharging into an environmentally sensitive area, you dechlorinate so that what's coming out of the pipe will not harm the environment that you're discharging into. Really not potentially possible in a short term or in this situation because what you're building is a whole wastewater treatment plant for your stormwater. It becomes a very expensive venture. Anything that we do within that stormwater pipe, we need to go to the regulatory agencies, Durham, and get their approval to do it. They're probably not going to allow us to do any kind of chemical addition to that stormwater flow because same reason, they don't want to harm the environment. The ultimate in what the theory is on most of the stormwater designs is separate. So you do the hydrodynamic separator or a vortex structure or something else that separates the solids out of that discharge stream. Your first flush, which hasn't really been talked about here tonight, is that when it first starts to rain, that first water that comes off the street, that's the most heavily laden with, whether it's bacteria, oils, petroleum products, whatever, that's where it's coming. So that first flush, if you can take that and divert it to an injection well rather than out to the surface water body, that's the best you're going to do. And that's sort of what the current design is. Do both of those types of projects in your discharge, into your stormwater system, that's where the future is going.
So, but the thing is, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Suarez, in the short term, so you have that long-term plan in place.
That's a big project.
You have that, how far away are we from that?
So that would be some of these critical projects of the stormwater projects, that is what that's going to encompass. What we're looking at for the 2.5 million, I believe that's just the hydrodynamic separator. I don't believe that includes an injection well, but I could be wrong. I'm just not sure. But even that construction we're talking is the end of 2026.
2026, all right.
And one last thing, two questions. So I'm assuming there's birds also everywhere in Miami Beach, and wherever there's no injection wells, is it safe to assume that we have the same problem where there's a lot of birds, you're gonna have this sort of bacteria that's gonna be pumping out into the bay?
It would be worth looking at. again, and I want to go back to Commissioner Bott's comment about the native birds that we want to make sure we preserve versus the feral birds. So it would be worth determining whether or not there's feral birds also in the
What's
area.
a feral bird?
Like, not native, not, like pigeons and crows and vultures.
Yeah.
So, or maybe vulture may be native, but
My second question is, have you ever seen anything like this before?
yes.
With birds?
There's animal feeding stations. So there are people who put bread, and then there's a flock of pigeons.
No, in another city. Have you ever seen this type of report or conclusion where you have a high amount of bird poop that's contributing to bacteria?
It's been observed in the literature. In Canada, for example, they have Canada geese, and there's Canada geese that influence the beaches there, so they have issues with the birds in that situation, as an example.
Those Canada geese are mean, they'll bite you.
Yeah, so, yeah, so birds are sometimes an issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know that there's a long-term plan in place, which is a 2026, potentially, best-case scenario. So the question is, in the short term, Jay?
Do you want to go through your list?
Well, we have a little list.
Okay,
That would help.
Amy.
That we made together. But in addition to adding more cleaning to the storm drain system, that should help. We had an idea to engage the city's cleanliness index inspectors to take a look at those specific hotspots at the street level. And I, did speak with Leslie about it briefly, but perhaps they can be focused on these areas and be reporting and then kind of feeding back to the sanitation team. Along the Tatum Waterway, there are situations where people are littering and there's garbage, and sanitation, can maybe evaluate adding additional services to make sure that that is also included, because it's not a traditional right-of-way area. Communications-wise, my team can work with Melissa and her team to get the word out more. We have campaigns. We can mark storm drains to let people know it's going right to the canal. Some of this is human behavior in terms of, garbage and litter. We are working on dredging in my department. We're getting at a point the flushing analysis is done. We may be going into permitting within the next 6 months or so. So that program is moving along. And then in addition to that, actually that's what we have in the more immediate time frame.
So I'll tell you, I love the cleanliness index program, and I think it's great. I think we know whether it's clean or not right now, and we know it's not clean. What I would do is I would do a crisis intervention, and flood the area with as many.
No pun intended.
Yeah, with as many cleaning resources as possible. Forget about the cleanliness index. The public will tell us whether it's being cleaned, whether it's cleaned or not. I think we just need to divert as much as we can to clean those catch basins, to doing the street sweeping, to doing those very detailed cleanings, because I just feel that's the low-hanging fruit. Working with the school board is something we absolutely need to do. It's going to take time. The injection well, certainly something that we certainly have to do. It's going to take time. But what is it that we can do right now, and that is in our control, as much as we can, to clean those catch basins, to do the street sweeping, to do the detailed cleaning of the curbs, and all of this other stuff that we can start tomorrow if we wanted to.
So if I might build on that, there are two things. One is that if we do a concerted effort over the next 6 months or so, especially as we head into the rainy season, we will have great data to tell us if those measures are effective, cleaning the streets and getting that runoff off the streets, or improving the quality of the runoff if such thing is possible. Like, it's not as disgusting as it used to be because we've had, concerted efforts and street sweeping and whatever else we're doing. We'll have like a before and an after. So 6 months or year with all these other things, we'll have a good sense of those measures are working in addition to the longer term thing. The second thing I will tell you is I would like to work with you and Melissa on the communications part of this, because
the initial plan that your predecessors put into place backfired spectacularly, which is basically in English and Spanish, pointing the finger, not literally, this wasn't a finger pointing sign, but it said, you guys are not picking up after your dogs and you're polluting the water, and if we catch you doing it, it'll be $200. And everyone looked at each other and were like, there aren't that many dogs here, and we're cleaning up after our dogs. Like, what are you even talking about? So it needs to be a more nuanced message so that the people who are actually taking care, like they're not changing the oil of their car and spilling the old oil down the drain, like they know it's a thing. It's the way Sophie Ringo approaches beach cleanups, right? Or Dara and Dave. They're like, this is a thing you can do to make it better. You are not solely responsible for everybody, but you've got to pick your stuff up and let's work together and we will help you do it. But this sort of big brother, if you do it, we're killing you, is not going to work. And there is still residual negativity towards that all these years later. And what we don't want is to piss people off. What we do want is for them to work together for us to all arrive at a better outcome.
One last thing, and I totally forgot to mention this, but when you sampled the water in Palmview Canal, or Parkview Canal, did you found also human in the water itself?
Yes.
You know, there is an anchorage of boats just south of Parkview Island, and I'm looking at it on the map, and there's probably like 20, 30 boats, okay? They don't move. They have not moved in probably a couple of years. They bring water, but the water disappears. It's only safe to assume that they're flushing their toilets into the bay. And on an incoming tide, that carries it just to the Parkview Canal. Could you say that might be causing also a large portion, at least, of the human bacteria?
Given what we see in the stormwater, I'm pretty sure it's coming from the streets.
No, not to say that it's not coming also from stormwater, but to say that, you know, because on an incoming tide, it's a very narrow passage right underneath, 70th Street. Because just let me finish. There's about 30 boats, and they're all flushing. Could that be also exasperating the issue?
It could be sampled, but my intuition tells me that the streets are the big one. It's the big one, and then also coming back to the recommendations of all the sources. I'm not as worried about the birds. We don't share as many diseases with birds, but we do share diseases with other humans.
Bird flu.
Well, bird flu, and we're
well, yeah,
and we're not going to be apprised of data that's being collected about bird flu.
But one thing that hasn't been discussed is, in terms of short-term recommendations, would be to see what can be done for the community that doesn't have sanitation, especially in the middle of the night. There's no access
the homeless?
to. Yes.
Okay. So
especially, there's no bathrooms available. Even when we go sampling, we have a hard time finding a bathroom or somebody letting us come in to use the restroom.
I think, you know what, we should not, shy away if we need to put porta potties. We got to do it. Because
we should just enforce our camping laws.
Well, but we cannot expect our police officers to be everywhere all the time. And that's the challenge that we have. Homeless individuals move depending on enforcement. It's like water. They go, if you do too much in one area, they'll go to the next area. And so, yes, while we have camping laws and they are a tool, we also do know that there is an issue there. Perhaps, the police need to go and check that area out. But to the extent that we do have an issue there, we should have porta potties as well, or have bathrooms open that individuals could also use. Let me just ask you, because you also mentioned UV. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the UV. How can that be used? How difficult is it to implement? How costly is it?
I mean, I've been looking in the literature for ideas in terms of how to treat surfaces, like street surfaces. The only thing I have found is with respect to COVID-19, when they were, spraying the streets with disinfectants. So maybe some of those technologies can be used. UV disinfection maybe will work. Been looking, yoga facilities, they have these special UV lights that disinfect the floors. That may be a possibility as well. The water, in order to disinfect the water, you have to have very low turbidity particles in the water. So, you know, there's a question about whether or not how well it can work with the water, but maybe it can. But I wanted to go back to the homeless issue.
Please.
Yes. I think it would be useful to maybe interview, you know, have some people who are experts in interviewing the homeless. One of my students, when he was sampling, he you know, the homeless person went up to him and they talked about, you know, facilities. And this homeless person said, I go intentionally in the storm sewer so it doesn't mess up the street. So they think they're doing a good thing. So there is an issue of access to sanitation facilities, and maybe communicating and having a conversation with the homeless may help identify what they would prefer or how to handle, how to handle that situation.
Amy and colleagues, if we agree, I think we need an item at next week's meeting. We have been dealing with an environmental emergency in Parkview Canal for feels like 5 years.
Since March of 2020.
5 years, we have been dealing with an environmental emergency in Parkview Canal. We are hearing today some very substantive action, some long-term fixes, but also some short-term fixes that we can implement if the political will is there to do it. And it's now in our hands to do it. And I think we should bring an item to Wednesday's meeting that we should ask the administration, Amy, together with Public Works, to work on.
And Alba's team.
And Alba's team.
And the police.
You know, from increased street and canal cleaning, to addressing the issues with homeless needing a place where to do their life-sustaining activities at. To addressing the issue with the school. We need an emergency item on Wednesday's agenda, Operation Clean Water, because we've done significant work from the initiation when we started lining these pipes, and we've seen a significant improvement. But if we truly dedicate ourselves to it and we get this tremendous feedback that we're getting, and we do the cleaning of the catch basins, and we do the street sweeping, and we do the detailed cleaning, and we look at the outfalls, and we see if we can do the UV sanitation. I don't know if pressure washing helps in any way or not.
For pressure washing, then you'd have to pick up that water
You have to pick up
somehow.
that
It
water.
would have to be collected. Instead of, you can't let it go into the storm system.
I'm going to make a motion of this committee.
Can we do it as co-primes?
Let's do co-primes, and I don't know, the three of us want to join in as co-primes.
Yeah, listen, I'm in favor of everything. Mr. Chair, respectfully, I don't think that putting porta potties is a solution.
No, I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah, where you put them, you know, how, what happens, I'm in favor of everything else except porta potties.
That's fine.
Okay.
Let's let it be professionally driven recommendations on what we need to, what emergency measures can we take over the next 6 months to see what drastic improvements we can achieve for Parkview Island Canal. It's been screaming for help for 5 years. We've been trying to do what we can. We've seen improvements, but there's more that can be done. And you know, I think we could bring something Wednesday to just immediately start working on stuff. We have the list. We could start Wednesday and doing. It feels like we've done significant. It's just this last stretch, and it's like this. It's like the last mile that you got to run through. But I think if we push ourselves, we could get there.
And just also, Commissioner Suarez, your point is not lost about the increasingly large anchorage that's right there. I will tell you, when this started, there were 3 or 4 boats out there. So I don't think, they didn't start the fire, to quote Billy Joel. Have they exacerbated it? Maybe, I don't know enough about that, but it has only gotten really big recently over the last year. And I have other issues about that because, you've got other parts of North Beach that are affected by what's going on there. I don't think we've ever dealt with it, but I'm not ruling anything out, but I wouldn't look to them as being like the primary source of what's going on in that very narrow bend behind Parkview. Because the other thing is, it seems like, and without being a water expert, it seems like where they are, it would go kind of past Parkview in the wider part of the Tatum Canal, and like having it go in and take a hard right turn and then a hard left turn and then take another, like it seems more convoluted.
Well, probably just mixes and.
So.
But where they are, it's already so broad, and it seems like it might go out to the bay before it comes back into Parkview.
So I want to recognize Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez to speak on this. We brought this item together. So Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez, you're recognized. I believe your hand is raised.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to tell you that I got a copy of the report the other day, and I put one very specific item on the agenda, and I'm hoping that you guys will support it. When I looked at everything that we could do and what wasn't so complicated, we've been looking at this idea of the UV lighting for a very long time. So my resolution is to direct, and it's very simple. Yours is much more comprehensive, but I think that we should pick 5 of the hot spots, have them figure out how to retrofit them with this UV lighting, and then go back and test in like 3 months and see what's happening. And I'm very happy with the results that. Now, I'm not happy with the results. I'm happy with the study and understanding what's actually going on. So I think that one of the simplest things we can do is to at least start getting the data to see if the UV does anything at all, so that we get like process of elimination. So that's really the only item, that I brought forth with this, because everything else was so complicated, the street sweeping. And I mean, there's so many things that we can do. So hopefully you guys will be supportive of at least this, the UV lighting portion of this. I think it's really important. And we did the pre-test now. We need to do this intervention, which is 5 outfalls, and then do a post-test. And I think that will be very telling. I don't know how you feel about that. But anyway, I'm glad that everyone's.
Well, and I think maybe we just
concerned.
We should probably just. I think it's one effort. I think we just should. If you're bringing an item, I don't know if you just want to like make it all one item, Commissioner.
Well, I have mine is very specific. Mine is pre-test. We have the pre-test now. Pick 5 hotspots, then post-test, and after that, I mean, look, a lot more comprehensive stuff has to happen. But I think sometimes when we get too comprehensive and we try to tackle everything at once, then we don't do that much. So mine is very, very narrow. And I think it will go a long way in looking at maybe once we figure out this UV lighting thing, and if it does work, then that's a possibility. One other thing that I wanted to bring up, somebody who actually, lives in the area told me that they think that the pump station has really exacerbated the problem because there's no UV lighting on that pump station, and it picks up all the filthy water and just injects it into the canal at a super high speed, and then it just sits there, and we're not looking at that, specifically. And so that's another problem that we face, and we probably should really try to retrofit the pump stations with UV lighting, because that's the majority of water that's going into Parkview, if you think about it.
All right,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me just recognize Commissioner Dominguez, who also has her hand raised on Zoom. Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have a very specific item, and it has to do with the EPA kayak, for the city to adopt the EPA kayak guideline. And it's very specific to the kayak launch. And there's way more to do, but this would be the first step in potentially updating the water quality standard for that area.
I will tell you, and Amy mentioned that to me, the recommendation in the report about possibly lowering that standard for kayak launches. And what would be the rationale in that, Amy?
Yeah, so that's an item.
Your mic is off.
Yeah, so that's an item that the professor brought to us that, we have this very strict standard for beach bathing, and we're utilizing that for this, very small canal, and she said it's something to consider. So it would be 371, I believe, MPN, where people could access the kayak launch for kayaking and feel comfortable that they would be safe if they stay in their kayak. And it would just be for that, and we'd have to, it's just something to think about.
I just want to
be a lot of guidance.
When you mentioned that when our briefing, that recommendation to me, I just had concerns because you just have to assume people who are in a kayak are going to get wet. They're going to fall off their kayak. They might end up in the water, and that to me is a concern. I see people take dogs on their kayaks or their kids, and it's very easy for someone to fall in the water. And I just for purposes of transparency, and I told you, Amy, when you brought that recommendation forward, I had a concern with that. And since we're in a public setting now, I just wanted to be out there. I'm not sure I will be able to support that because until it's okay for bathing in the water, I'm not sure I will feel comfortable telling someone they can kayak in the water.
Yeah. Just to follow up on some of maybe the temporary solutions, and Jay, I don't know if you can speak to this, but is there a temporary injection well, not an injection well, obviously, but a container that can do the hydraulic press above ground and then feed it back into the outfall? I mean, is there an engineering contraption that we can do above ground temporarily as a modular fix?
Your mic.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge, I know there are temporary units. We use them, during king tides on our pumps. We use those separators, the downstream defenders to do similar, treatment before it's discharged. But where the stormwater is coming off the street, entering into a catch basin, most of that's by gravity. So in order to treat that water, you'd have to collect it, bring it above.
Oh, you pump it up.
We can explore that. Anything we do with the drainage, we have to take it to Durham, get their blessing with it. But we can explore something like that and see if we can come up with a bench scale or something that may, offer some solutions.
Okay, maybe part of our request for next week is something
to explore that. Yeah. We can incorporate that. Commissioner Vaughn.
So two things. One, I don't know if Commissioner Dominguez is still on the call, but I was originally inclined to think about letting people know that they could make a decision about whether or not to kayak. But then I remembered that I would sit on my deck and watch people, especially coming around the bend of Parkview Island canals, kind of like being on a lazy river, right? So they would put their paddles up and they would kind of have their arms trailing the water, and it was so lovely. And people on paddle boards would be kind of like paddling with their arms, and kids would be on their paddle boards and jumping in and out. And I would literally say, if you have cuts, get your hands out of the water now, and no matter what you do, shower the second you get home. And that was just me on my deck sounding like somebody's scary old grandmother. Like,
I could see that.
I was going to say mom,
Yeah.
but you said grandmother.
But I'm like, make sure you wash your hands. But, people are like, oh my God, thank you for telling me. So I worry about that because, in Crab Alley, people teach their dogs to swim and people are out there fishing. And I don't want to, so I don't want to encourage people to think that it's okay because it doesn't just stop at, like, I'm going to safely paddle. So I love the idea, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And then the other thing was, we're talking about
Operation Clean Water, bring in an item to.
Oh, I know what it was. Well, first, okay, so two things. One is, how about the poop stops here? Is the name of the operation.
What is the operation?
Operation Clean Water, this is emergency intervention.
Our emergency intervention there, what can we aggressively do over the next 6 months?
But I actually had a
Yeah.
thing, so,
But it's not, it's bird poop, that's the problem.
no, it's not, it's human.
It's not just
it's
bird
human.
poop.
But wait, so can it, before, because we can go back and forth on this. There's too much poop in the water, whether it's bird or human or dog or iguana. It's a combustible mix. It's coming from lots of different places. We got to clean that shit up, literally and figuratively, right? Like, that's the issue. So I will just say, and I love a little interdepartmental rivalry. Jay, looking at you. So the new Arctic that we just unveiled yesterday, the genesis of that real-time crime center thing with the drones and the cameras on poles started because 2 burglary detectives were like, we just don't know enough about what happened here. Why don't we put some cameras on poles and try to figure this out, like 15 years ago? And they did. And that was them jerry-rigging stuff. And that is how we went from that to what we have now. And I'm not saying I'm encouraging you to jerry-rig things together, but I'm just saying they did it. And, you know, so like get to your little workbench and start tinkering around, see what you can come up with.
So let's allow staff to put together a very aggressive plan that we can bring to commission to run this final stretch that we have over the next 6 months. And I think you see at least 3, 4, 5 commissioners participating in this discussion who I think would be probably very inclined, at least without hearing from our other colleagues who I know and I trust care deeply about this. Is a reason why we've engaged in these studies, and we're so grateful for the guidance that the doctor has given us. Nick, let's open up the floor to members of the public wishing to speak on this item. If there are members of the public wishing to speak on this item, please raise your hand on Zoom.
The first caller is Omar Jimenez.
Omar, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, good afternoon. Omar here, president of the Parkview Island Sustainable Association. As we found out from the LTC, Biscayne Bay Elementary School was identified as a severe contamination hotspot with 198,000 parts per 100 milliliters. That's 2,800 times the current FDOH standards. The Biscayne Beach Elementary site tested 20 times higher than the Parkview kayak launch site. It's imperative that this hotspot is eliminated and this area is remediated. This further reinforces the need for increased above-ground sanitation in parks and services along the shoreline of the Parkview Canal and Tatum Waterway Walkway. The walkway is an extension of 75th Street. In the past few weeks, there has been a plastic mesh fence erected along the entire shoreline of the Tatum Waterway Walkway, preventing anyone from accessing the shoreline for cleanup of contaminated trash and debris. The kayak launch remains closed since 2020, depriving residents of recreational resources. The study states that achieving full compliance with Ocean Beach water quality standards may be unrealistic, raising the need for alternative water quality thresholds for kayaking and other activities. We are glad to see the hydrodynamic separators planned for late 2026. These are good for sediment and trash interception, but do nothing for bacteria or nutrients. And maybe jellyfish units are the best ways to address the core issues, yet some of these critical projects remain unfunded. The city should prioritize seeking state and federal grants to expand water treatment infrastructure beyond what is currently budgeted. Over the past few years, as we know, our association has carried out an extensive engagement and outreach campaign, paving the path for a more resilient and environmentally sustainable future for Parkview and North Shore. Some of the projects we focused on have been this water quality issue, repairs and upgrades to the Tatum Waterway Walkway, including renaming the walkway into North Shore's first nature trail, and a research and data collection project focused on the viability of eastern oysters and leaf tree oysters in the Parkview Canal and Tatum Waterway. We strongly believe that remediation of this area would also greatly benefit from the addition of more holistic approaches to the plan of action, to include an oyster restoration project, floating vegetation islands for nutrient sequestration and water purification scattered along the canal, and introduction of plants and vegetation that purify the water along the shoreline. The main focus of the alternative holistic approaches would be based on bacteria and nutrient removal. through natural and already proven cost-effective purification and sequestration processes. We remain optimistic with the establishment of blue zones in Miami Beach and the transformation North Beach is going through. There is no better time to think about the incredible opportunities ahead of us. Our city's economy comes from tourism, hospitality, and property taxes. But what we sometimes seem to forget is that our biggest asset, the environment and safety of our recreational waterways, are the true economic engine of this city. People move here to live on or near the water, to be able to recreate in it, not just look at it and think of how nice it would be to recreate in these waters. And that's why we're really looking forward to continue our collaboration with you all in North Beach and Parkview Island. And just one last note, as a waterfront property owner of Parkview, I look forward to one day finally being able to enjoy full use of my property as I intended when I first purchased my home on this island, without having to think about the negative cloud of uncertainty that has had drastic impacts and negative effects on our serene island lives for the past 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. And I want to thank you for your leadership and your advocacy and your passion on this issue. I've certainly have learned a lot from you in our conversations as it relates to Parkview Island and Parkview Canal. And you've also highlighted, you know, the issues with cleanup and the actual conditions along the shoreline from 71st Street to 75th Street. You know, specifically, I know you've highlighted that the shoreline along Dickens is not being cleaned how it should be, and you know that's something that we need to address. The trash accumulation in the mangroves and the roots along the Tenem waterway shoreline due to the tides is something that hopefully can be addressed as part of our Operation Clean Water that we take to the City Commission on next Wednesday. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No, sir.
All right. With that, Amy, any other feedback that you need from this committee? Any other information you need to share with us at this time?
A huge thank you for allowing the professor, myself, and the team to present all this. It's a lot of information, and everyone was so gracious in preparing for this, and you know, your ideas. And to the staff team, this whole team has been working on this issue, and I can assure you they're incredibly committed. So
I
thank you.
also wanted to add that the staff has been wonderful, very responsive. It's been great working with the city. Thank you.
And the professor as well. I mean, the work that she has done is just drops compared to what a large firm would have charged us, and the learning for her students, and they've really been outstanding.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Doctor.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Amy, and to all of our staff, to Public Works, to our engineers, to everyone working on this effort. Really, this is a priority. It's been a long-standing priority, and I know we'll get through this if we all come together with the seriousness, continued seriousness that this merits. Thank you all. And with that, Mr. Director, there's a number of items we haven't gotten to that perhaps we should continue to next meeting.
Okay, and on this one, Mr. Chair, on number 8, there was a recommendation to move this to the full city commission next Wednesday. Do you want to keep this item in committee or conclude this item?
I know we're working on a separate, it sounds like there's many different items being worked on. Sounds like Commissioner Rosa Gonzalez has an item that she's bringing on UV lighting. Sounds like Commissioner Dominguez has an item that she's bringing on the water, on the levels of the bacteria and kayaking. It sounds like the committee is separately co-priming the Operation Clean Water initiative as an emergency 6-month enhancement measure. So I think might be best, perhaps let's keep this item on committee.
Okay.
So that we have an item parked here where we can continue to get updates on our efforts, measure our progress, and keep the expectation high on the deliverables we expect, especially as it relates, you know, the cleanliness, the mangrove, the shoreline, and making sure that we are seriously addressing these issues.
So we'll show this as continue to a future date.
Yes, let's
Okay.
continue this item,
Okay.
just on a monthly basis. I think we just need to keep this item coming back on a monthly basis. Okay?
All right.
Okay, and so with that, let's show items number 9, 10, 12, 13, and 17 deferred to our next meeting.
Okay.
All right? All right, anything else for the good of the order? All right, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.